Hello and welcome to a very wet Suzuka circuit. 5.8 kilometer long, 53 laps we're going to see this afternoon. 53 very wet laps. The field being led away on the green flag lap by pole position man Michael Schumacher, his sixth pole position of the 1994 Grand Prix season, also his sixth pole position of his Grand Prix career. Alongside him, the man that's second in the World Championship and the man that desperately wants to beat Michael Schumacher to the line, Damon Hill. Well, the dream front row, John, but not the dream weather.
Well, I think it's a nightmare for Michael Schumacher there, looking completely at ease and relaxed with Flavio Briatore and Willy Weber. Contrast with Damon Hill, who to some extent I think has remained wisely in his car for no other reason than he keeps his racing shoes dry. Now, Michael may have a pair of galoshes over his racing boots, but you can see in Damon's eyes, certainly this is not the penultimate round to the World Championship that he had hoped for. He came here to Suzuka with a car and chassis package which in his mind, and I think in the mind of a great deal of people, was going to be sufficient to win and beat Michael Schumacher and certainly mean that the championship would be concluded in Australia. But then we had rain arrive on Saturday afternoon, and it's been more or less wet, and since we were here some 4 hours ago for the morning warm-up, it's begun to rain, it's stopped, it's gone again, and right now there is rain falling. It's not heavy, but the circuit is very, very wet indeed. And I personally am much happier sitting in our commentary booth talking about it than being not so much in the front of the grid, but anywhere behind the front row of the grid. It is going to be exceptionally difficult on a circuit that is very, very demanding.
A lot of rain and a lot of people again, as always here at Suzuka. 125,000 people have won the lottery for the ticket. Some 6 million applications for tickets here every year, and only 125,000 people get to go to the Grand Prix. And one of the things you can do more here than at any other Grand Prix circuit is buy souvenirs, John.
And just looking directly behind our commentary booth, there's a mass of stalls and shops, and those have been working flat out, and normally by the time the Grand Prix is finished there's not a single item left. Well, there's a man who certainly seems very relaxed indeed, and Nigel Mansell, since he's now into the second of his 3 races at the end of the 94 season, appears more relaxed than I've ever seen him, probably at any time in his Grand Prix. And of course quickest in Saturday morning's unofficial 1.5-hour session, starting on the second row of the grid. And well, it's a difficult situation for Mansell, because I think this is the first time he will have driven a Formula One car in 1994 in a race in wet conditions. And we saw what happened 3 weeks ago in Jerez, when he literally just had too many revs on the clock, spun the wheels, stood still, and just was enveloped by the entire field and lost any advantage he had from his qualification.
Harold Frentzen will start third, his best qualifying position ever, and the second consecutive race he will start on the second row of the grid. Right in front of Johnny Herbert on his return to Benetton. Remember, Herbert made his Grand Prix debut for Benetton in 1989, finished fourth on his debut in Rio, but then his feet hadn't healed completely yet, and he was replaced by Mr. Pirro, and now he's replacing another injured driver, if you believe the press releases, that is. Anyway, Nigel Mansell, very relaxed indeed. Over breakfast this morning, I was happy to join him, and he was talking about the golf course he's bought and the lakes he's got in the golf course where he can go fishing and lots of carp, and he wanted to talk about a lot of things, but not about motor racing. He was very relaxed indeed.
Well, look again at Nigel Mansell's eyes, and there's a certain amount of trepidation, I would say, in his eyes, because he knows that here at Suzuka it's a very fast run down into that, what normally is a 4th gear double right-hand corner, is going to be treacherous, and he's got the advantage of being on the second row of the grid behind the always mighty out of the green lights Damon Hill. But a lot of cars around him, a lot of cars behind him, and that's something that I'm sure he is very conscious of.
John, there's another thing he's very conscious of. That's the fact that he has got Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Eddie Irvine, Mika Häkkinen and Jean Alesi around him. And he said they might not realize as much as I do that this race is 53 laps and it's not going to be won into the first corner.
Well, a lot less than, 15 minutes ago I saw Eddie Irvine and Eddie Jordan. They were having a quick conflab before Irvine went to his car, and the discussion centered around keep out of trouble, you can win this race. And after what we saw from Irvine in his debut Grand Prix here last year, in conditions that were part wet, part dry, certainly the way he has gone through the weekend, there's no reason to believe that is certainly a podium position is not on the cards.
Ukio Katayama, the man that was very disappointed not to qualify any higher than he did. And if we look at the list, Johnny Herbert, fifth, a very good performance in his return to Benetton. Also, I think a good performance, although he hasn't qualified that high up. He's only 25th. We saw yesterday afternoon and this morning good performances by Mika Salo, the third Finnish driver in the race.
I think Mika Salo has justified all the faith that Lotus have put in him, giving him his debut Grand Prix. A fellow Finn, Mika Häkkinen, somebody who also has got something that he wants to say here this weekend, and that's win for the McLaren Peugeot team. And of course all three Finnish drivers here familiar with treacherous conditions, but these in Suzuka very unlike those in Finland.
Mika Häkkinen saying yesterday afternoon, he said, well, the conditions on the main straight here were very similar than driving in Finland on the snow, where there's only two tracks where you want your wheels to go in, and if you leave the tracks, then you might as well be spinning.
Allard, I know all about it. The first car I had was a BMW Isetta, which was a three-wheeler, driving it in the snow where the center wheel was in deep snow. I managed to spin it in front of a big bus on the road outside Belfast, didn't hit anything, and I just very quietly selected gear and drove off the way from the direction I was coming, and I know what Mick is talking about.
And you had a smile on your face as well, John. There's 6.5 minutes to go to the start of the warm-up lap, the Japanese Grand Prix, the 15th round, the FIA Formula One World Championship. 53 laps of 5.8 kilometers each. Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill on the front row. We'll be taking a short break and be back soon after that. The Japanese Grand Prix, 15th round of the FIA Formula One World Championship from Suzuka. We are 4.5 minutes away from the green flag, and if you look to the left of your screen, there's Hideki Noda, who will start this Grand Prix from... Is he going to start from the pit lane, or is he allowed to be on the last row of the grid, John?
I would say he will start from the pit lane, and I think that's the best result Hideki's had to date, because with 25 cars ahead of him, starting there is probably the safest spot.
Schumacher and Hill on the front row with the Benetton and the Williams. It's Michael's 6th pole position of this season. An amazing season he's had, John, so far.
Well, he's utterly dominated the championship, but of course all the controversy that surrounded the Benetton Ford team and Michael Schumacher, particularly at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone in July.
So, Frentzen and Mansell on the second row of the grid, then Johnny Herbert and Eddie Irvine completing the top 6. Fourth row of the grid is going to be Jean Alesi in the Ferrari and Mika Häkkinen in the fastest of the McLaren Peugeots. Martin Brundle in 9th. Brundle, fastest man in the warm-up, fastest man in the wet so far, alongside Rubens Barrichello. Berger and Morbidelli, Brundle and Katayama complete the top 14. 15th on the grid is return to Sauber, JJ Leto. 16th, Pierluigi Martini. Zanardi is 17th, 18th, Christian Fittipaldi, Hannes and Lagos making his debut in Formula One after finishing second in the Formula 3000 Championship, Alboreto and Comas. Then Noda, Brabham, Salo and Inoue. Salo and Inoue both making their first Grand Prix start. Of course, the Drivers' World Championship, 5 points between Schumacher and Hill, then a long gap between Hill and Berger, Hakkinen, Alesi, Barrichello, then David Coulthard, 7, 8, Martin Brundle, 9, Jos Verstappen, and the rest of the point scorers. Frentzen, 14th, 6 points, Wendlinger's got 4 points, Cheser is 4, and all the Sauber drivers, and last the Sauber drivers, JJ Leto, who actually scored that point back in Canada in the Benetton. In the Constructors' Championship, there's a 2-point gap between Benetton Ford and Williams Renault. Benetton leading that with 97 points, then Ferrari third, but Jordan is 5th behind McLaren, ahead of Tyrrell. They're the rest of the point scorers in the Constructors' Championship. All to play for here in Suzuka, and an all-important first corner.
Some contact, and reflecting again back to the Grand Prix here last year, where Eddie Irvine stole a march on a great deal of people ahead of him. He went down the left-hand side of the track, stayed wide in the first part of the corner, and overtook 3 cars. Now, he's on the right-hand side of the track. He says that's his preferred starting side. But of course, the tendency is for everybody to try and crowd over to that inside line into the first corner. So I'm sure we're going to see some action. Hopefully there will not be any contact, because that would be a great disappointment indeed. And in these conditions, I'm quite certain that everybody is fully aware of the problems that could arise through some erratic kind of action on the start right into that first corner.
Engines being started. Grid is being cleared at the moment, and the good thing for all the teams is that with that long lap and the rain, they've got quite a lot of time of clearing all the equipment back into the pits. Most of that equipment will probably be put into flight cases very quickly after the start of the race, because they have to get out of here pretty soon. I think 3:15 the flight goes to Australia, where the cars will arrive Monday afternoon, and the teams will be working on them from Monday night indeed. No rest for the mechanics this week.
Not at all, but really this is the crunch situation for this man, Michael Schumacher, on pole position, and Damon Hill. This is the round in the championship that really was going to be crucial in normal circumstances. Now, what we've got really is a lottery, and anybody in the 26-car field could become either the winner or be on the podium. And there we're just on the top of screen now, we see the highlighted part of the circuit. And it's through these very, very quick S's that we saw this morning Michael Schumacher get caught. He, like teammate Johnny Herbert on Saturday, let his car run out over those red and white curbings on the exit of the first of those sequence of corners. The back end snapped away. Fortunately for Schumacher, no contact. More importantly, he had the presence of mind to keep his engine running. But it is treacherous out there. And just look, that's the spray from one car going at little more than half race speed. Imagine what this is going to be like in little over 2 minutes when the 15th round of the championship is about to start. And it is a round which is absolutely crucial to Damon Hill to try and narrow that 5-point lead Michael Schumacher has. Alternatively, Michael Schumacher is looking for 10 points to extend his lead and to make his comfort zone in Adelaide virtually bulletproof.
So, for Michael Schumacher to win the World Championship, he has to have a gap of 10 points and more by the time we leave tonight. The only way to do that is if Damon Hill retires and Michael scores the second or a first place. If Damon Hill finishes first or second, there is no way the championship's going to be decided here this afternoon.
And just something very, it's just been pointed out to me here in the booth. I've never been to a floodlit Grand Prix before, and all around the circuit there are lights, and those lights are on. The first time I know a Grand Prix to start, maybe finish, but certainly start under assistance from artificial light. That's how difficult it is. Look, there we are, looking from the end of the straight down towards Spoon Corner. You can see nothing. It's like a fog, and even those lights, the effect of the light is really almost negligible.
Well, I can see Michael Schumacher coming into the chicane. Where's the rest of the field? There's Damon Hill. A big gap with Michael Schumacher. John, that's part of the psychological warfare.
Well, I think it's actually a negative warfare. If Michael thought by sprinting away he was going to gain something, I think, in fact, it might work against him. And if I was in Damon Hill's position, I would slow the rest of the field down as much as possible to put Michael onto the grid and wonder where is the rest of the field. Damon doing that, you can see, creeping down, trying to keep a little bit of a gap, but in fact, Michael Schumacher now virtually at a standstill and allowing the field to draw back up into position as they come down onto the grid proper. Schumacher doing a practice start. There again, second one. Third one, so virtually the entire field taking the advantage at the low speed they're at in first gear. Booted, see how much traction you get, see how much you can control it. But really, without traction control, the most important thing at the start, when the light goes to green, is to just get a little bit of momentum of the car, and as long as you got away as quickly and cleanly as possible.
The green flag is being waved at the back of the grid. The red light will go on any second now. It's in the middle of your screen. There it is, and the green is on. Who is making the best start? Michael Schumacher moves over viciously to the inside of the corner. But Eddie Irvine and Johnny Herbert both driving down the inside. And again, I cannot see Nigel Mansell. Mansell has not made a good start at all.
Well, certainly the first 5 and 6 cars cleanly through the first part of this long sequence of corners. Michael Schumacher dropped the clutch and virtually turned sharp right. Nigel Mansell, who lost again a lot of ground, going very wide, using the wide part of the circuit, the part that is in effect more grippy, but of course dangerous, the car that you're trying to do it with. And looks like it's difficult to tell which it was, but it is the car may not see you. But Michael Schumacher got the dream start, the start that he wanted. And, well, you can see the difference in gap between himself and Damon Hill. It's probably about a second, but more importantly, he's got clear vision.
So Michael Schumacher leads Damon Hill. Then it's Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who had a very good start indeed. Challenged Damon Hill to go around the outside of that first corner, but it's here where local knowledge counts. There's Johnny Herbert and Jean Alesi, another man with a very good start indeed.
Well, Alesi reveling in the thought of a wet race because he feels this is the equalizer that he's been looking for here in Japan to give him an opportunity to score for what would him be a maiden Grand Prix win. And Damon, oh look at Damon as he came through Spoon and Schumacher as well. There was a lot of water, loose water, standing water on that part of the circuit here in the straight as well. Very treacherous indeed. You saw Damon's car flick and fidget around. Now Damon well on the left-hand side of the straight, as was Heinz-Harald Frentzen, to try and get some visibility. But now, at the end of the first lap, down into this chicane, Michael Schumacher in the lead, but most importantly, and I re-emphasize, he has got the best vision of the remaining 25 cars on the circuit.
Let's see what the gap is between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill. But what is more important and maybe amazing, look at all that. I think that's fuel coming out of, or oil maybe, from the overflow. But what's more important, I haven't seen any cars off the circuit yet, John.
Well, I must congratulate everybody in the 20s. Oh, and my Heinz-Harald Frentzen is off. He just ran wide. You saw the left rear of his car just grab that curve, and he was pulled off the circuit, just as we were saying that everybody had made it right. Now, here's a moment of caution as Frentzen comes back onto the circuit to make sure that he doesn't into there. Well, one of the two LaRousse Fords being pushed back into the garage. We can't see anything. There's so much spray here. I think it's the spinner, in fact.
Hideki Noda, I think, is out of the race on lap 2.
And just look, I mean, you can see from the onboard camera of Michael Schumacher, that's just rain that's falling. Maybe, and he locks up the right front. Well, there's water there. There was loose water. He turned in, put the brake on. The brake locked up. It grabbed. So it meant he lost steering. And Damon Hill has suddenly closed and narrowed down that gap in the space of half of the second lap, from over a second down to, well, you see it there, quarter, half a second at most.
So we have a race for first place between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill. We're on lap 2, and the gap at the end of lap 1 was 1.8 seconds. Then it was Heinz-Harald Frentzen, but it's now Johnny Herbert who's moved into third position. Jean Alesi's fourth. Then I think comes Heinz-Harald Frentzen ahead of Nigel Mansell. But we've got to wait for the computer at the end of lap 2 to find out what the situation is.
Well, clearly Damon Hill was able to take advantage of that moment, but let's look again at the start. Look at Schumacher. It's almost as if he put full right hand down on the steering lock to block Damon Hill. He may have put a little bit of lock on, but I think when he dropped the clutch, the car did take a snap. There you see Frentzen looking for the long way. Damon said, no way, Heinz-Harald, and maintained his second place. Frentzen then maintained that until the end of the first lap, start of the second, where excitement, enthusiasm, exuberance overtook him, and he ran wide. And we have to wait and see now at the end of the second lap in Suzuka in appalling conditions to find out where Frentzen is.
Schumacher leads, and he leads Damon Hill, and Damon is, I think, fairly quick round that first corner, John. The gap 1.169 seconds to be exact. Damon a little quicker, but lap times are actually slower than on the previous lap. The previous lap was a 2:04, this a 2:09 and a 2:08. Then it's Johnny Herbert, already some 10 seconds behind Michael Schumacher. Alesi, Mansell and Frentzen is actually in 6th position. Eddie Irvine 7th, and that's probably a little disappointment for Eddie.
Well, I think it maybe, well, certainly isn't as spectacular as we saw last year, but the most important thing is that he is on the track, he's in position, he's just in fact been passed by Martin Brundle and Eddie Irvine seems to have disappeared all the way down to 10th place, and I think Irvine is in trouble. In fact, I think Irvine is off the circuit and out of the Grand Prix.
Irvine is in 12th, so he did have a spin somewhere. So both Heinz-Harald Frentzen and Eddie Irvine having had a spin, and it has stopped raining. I mean, this, John, is a monsoon. It's bucketing down. I would be surprised if we don't see a safety car out on the circuit very soon, because these conditions are the worst I've seen all weekend. This is just unbelievable.
Well, there's no question in my mind that the weight of rain we've got falling now is too great for the deep groove Goodyear tires to deal with. There you can see at the end of the straight, now Michael Schumacher has to be very, very careful indeed, as does Damon. Damon is at the disadvantage because he's being completely shrouded in spray. Michael Schumacher slowing down. We wondered why the lap times had slowed down between the first and second lap. Clearly conditions had deteriorated around the back of the circuit, but here and now, at start-finish straight, the circuit is absolutely awash, and I would be surprised if he has yellow flag, safety car signal is out. The safety car is now leaving the pit lane, but it is behind first and second place cars. But that yellow flag is out, and the SC means safety car sign.
Oh, Johnny Herbert spins off down the main straight. You can't see it yet, but Johnny spins off down the main straight.
Indeed, and Johnny Herbert's car just aquaplaned out of control as he came. Rather, there we see Johnny's car. It's gone probably 300 meters or more. That is what happens when water just lifts the car off the ground. You lose control instantly. Johnny, of course.
Katayama off as well.
Yes, and Katayama smacked into the pit wall just adjacent to the Williams pits. No damage to anybody on the pit lane, but the Williams team would have had to leap back very quickly indeed. We've got waved yellow flags, furiously waved yellow flags, and these conditions are absolutely appalling. And imagine that, well, this is the scene. We've got the safety car making its way at the best pace it can to try to get to the head of the field, as the field is making its way, still making its way past here in our commentary booth on start-finish straight.
We're back at Suzuka with Schumacher, Hill, Alesi. The safety car is out. It's bucketing down with rain, and there's people spinning off down the main straight. The first one was Johnny Herbert. There's the last one, Taka Inui. That's the end of his Grand Prix debut for the Simtech team. Also Katayama out of the race.
Hello, that spin of Inui had me standing in my seat because he just missed Katayama's Tyrrell, which has stopped midway down the pit straight. So he's limping. He's probably got a clip when that car hit the pit concrete wall. He may well have had part of the suspension or something internal in the car hit him a slap on the knee or lower down on the ankle, and he has been carried back into the Simtech Ford garage, and he will receive attention very quickly indeed. But there, Michael Schumacher, if you look at his teammate Johnny Herbert, he's perfectly fit and well, very frustrated and disappointed undoubtedly, but the conditions here in the space of 30 seconds changed from being just about drivable to being totally dangerous and undrivable, and it was really, I would say, a rather late decision to put that safety car out. It should have been out before Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill came through. They got the waved yellow flag, they did see the sign, but probably their concentration and focus was so intense, just keeping their car on the track, they may well not have seen it at the point where it was being shown.
There, the point of impact of Katayama's car when he hit the wall. Now, I'm not sure, that car doesn't seem to be damaged that much. That is Katayama's Tyrrell, and I'm not sure whether it should stay there for the rest of the race, because
well, I think that car, they will try to remove it, because leaving it there in conditions like this, it is just something that is going to be hit. There's no question about it. So the safety car will remain on the circuit, certainly until the rain that we have seen falling eases. The monsoon rain that fell in the space of 15 seconds, it just came out of the heavens. You could almost count it, it was so large. So that car still is remaining there, and I would be very disappointed if that car, and well, in fact, Inui's car has been taken away, but I would be very disappointed if that car isn't removed. The marshals, in fact, have left back to safety as the train of cars makes its way back down on the pit straight, and when those, well, the remaining cars in this field, we're showing 24, but Inui makes it 23, so, and Katayama's out as well, Herbert, so there's probably about 20 cars in total on the circuit. So once those 20 cars are passed, then the marshals will leap across and have a second opportunity to try and get that Tyrrell of Katayama to safety.
Michael Schumacher, we're looking straight at him in the Benetton Ford. And there's Nigel Mansell. Of course, Mansell being familiar with safety car procedures of the IndyCar team. And I remember a sports car race here back in 1991, John, where the same thing happened, and these sports cars have, as you said yesterday, different tires, different wet weather tires. They can, well, you can have deeper puddles and still be on the road. But I think it was Jeff Lees, actually, who down the main straight spun straight to the left in Newfoundland.
Well, I don't know what the tires they use are, but they certainly have got a tread pattern that is about half as deep again as the Goodyear depth of tread, and that's probably about 3 to 3.5 millimeters deep. And of course, we don't normally have that sort of weight of rain that we've seen here in Suzuka. So what we've had here is typical monsoon-type weather, and the Japanese manufactured Bridgestones, Dunlops, Yokohamas, whatever else, they are a very special tire indeed, but they're only allowed to be used in extreme conditions. And in that particular race you're talking about, in fact, many of the teams, the European teams that didn't have access to them, just didn't bother driving because they knew the risks were too great. So therefore, it was very much a domestic race between Toyota and Nissan.
We're on lap 5, and already of the 3 Japanese drivers that started this Grand Prix, none's running. That is a big disappointment for the Japanese crowd. They must be disappointed anyway, because they are getting wet, I tell you. The rain seems to have eased off a little bit, John, I think.
Yes, the rain itself has backed down a little bit. It's still raining quite heavily, in fact. I mean, it's, by European standards, this is quite a heavy rain shower storm we're in. But really the problem lies on the track. And because the cars have been running now at a low speed, effectively under the control of the safety car, there's still a great deal of standing water all around the circuit. And when it's decided to allow the race to go back to green, again, Schumacher will have the advantage. Damon Hill will have to be, oh, there you see, that is the damage to Kia Katayama. Tyrrell, the right front, the tire has been pushed from the edge of the rim, and there, in fact, you can see that the whole rim has pushed right in, and that is the carbon fiber brake disc. You can see the caliper as well. So that impact, which took place about, 5 yards, let's say, just before where the Williams team's timing are based on the pit wall, they must have had a fright that really they don't need any more of this weekend.
Position has not changed, will not change. We're on the safety car procedure. The safety car, it's funny that the safety car is at a total different point on the circuit than Michael Schumacher is at this moment, John. Schumacher knows the safety car is out. He doesn't know where it is.
Well, the most important thing is that at the start-finish, the finish line, as it were, there is a Japanese gentleman hanging out an SC safety car sign, another flag marshal with a standing yellow flag. And, of course, all the drivers in their briefing will have been made aware of the safety procedure. Of course, drivers ought to be aware of it anyway. Part of being a Formula One driver is understanding and being able to use the rules and regulations both in the correct sense but also to your advantage. So as long as the gentleman is hanging out that sign and there are yellow flag at the point, then everything is under control of the safety car. There was an element of opportunism on the part of Michael Schumacher, but I think when he got the power on, the thing took a bit of a bite and really shot him over to the right. Again, Frentzen looking for the outside line. Local knowledge from a man who's familiar with Formula 3000 here at Suzuka, but Damon Hill quite rightly just said, no way, my son, I'm going to beat Michael Schumacher, wet or dry, and I don't want any interference whatsoever from you.
Lap time to drop to 3 minutes and 40 seconds. That's the speed the pace car's doing. There's Johnny Herbert. Not a happy man. Although he probably just got caught out. Yesterday, the conditions weren't maybe not even half as bad as they are now, and Mika Häkkinen said it was very dangerous. David Brabham nearly spun down the straight yesterday. So, just unlucky.
I think maybe what Johnny was doing was trying to get himself out of the spray of the cars ahead of him, and in doing so may have put himself onto a part of the circuit that just was that little bit fractionally wetter, just like more standing water. It only has to catch one wheel, and that wheel to stop rotating and to throw the car into that long and never-ending looping spin that we saw, certainly from our commentary position, Johnny Herbert get into. So in trying to give himself more visibility, I think he just caught a bit of water that was deeper than his tires could cope with, and that was it. It's unfortunate. He was doing what he thought was the right thing, and I wouldn't blame him for any of what followed after the car went out of control.
You see a big puddle on the inside of that corner, and this could be very good for Alesi. He could try something very opportunist. It's a chance for Frentzen to get back up where he was. It's a chance for Eddie Irvine to gain a couple of places. And basically, although we're on lap 7, I think we have a restart. The Grand Prix will start as soon as the safety car is pulling off, going back into the pit. That's at least another 4.5, 5 minutes away, I think.
Well, the most important thing is, of course, to get the pit straight clear of all the debris that was thrown on partly by Johnny Herbert's car, though he really didn't put too much on the track. It was more from Ukiya Katayama and Taki Inui as he smote the pit wall. So basically that part of the track now I think is pretty clear, and it's just really down to the race director to decide at which point it's safe to allow motor racing to recommence. And it isn't going to be this lap, because the safety car once again is going to lead this chain, this snake of cars around for one more lap. And there you see, you can get a better view in fact of the track, just how much water there is on the left hand side. You can see the mirror effect, whereas the centre of the track, which is probably the most highly cambered part of the track, appears to be reasonably clear. Certainly, in terms of standing water, looks to be about the best part of the track.
They won't pull off on this lap, they won't pull off on the next lap. At least 2 more laps behind the safety car as far as I can work it out. And that's the boss of Benetton, Mr. Flavio Briatore.
Looking down, you can see the ribbons of water coming off both Schumacher, Damon Hill and Jean Alesi, and that's pretty unpleasant.
We're on behind the safety car, we're on lap 8. Going to take a short commercial break here on Eurosport. Please rejoin us after that here in Suzuka. We're back in Suzuka, back in the race, back behind the safety car. We're on lap 8 of the Japanese Grand Prix, the 15th round of the FIA Formula One World Championship. Michael Schumacher led the field from the start, Damon Hill right behind him. Then there was Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who spun off on the second lap, had to take a very long way around the first corner, falling back into 5th position. The safety car is out because of a monsoon rain, and just when that started, Johnny Herbert, Ukyo Katayama and Taka Inoue, all 3 of them spun off on the main straight.
Hello, we got a view of the exit of Spoon coming onto the straight, and I would think that in fact the visibility there is absolutely zero, because it wasn't the spray that was coming off the wheels of the car, it was that the cloud base at that point of the circuit was on the ground. And I think what we're seeing now is not a problem with the rain, the water on the circuit, it's a visibility problem around the far end of the circuit, the corner that exits onto the straight. Between there and midway where the straight then starts to climb up again and rises, that area is covered in a pea soup fog.
That's bad news for all the drivers that want to leave early on a helicopter to Nagoya to go down to Australia, where, as I've been informed, yesterday in Adelaide it was raining as well. Well, whatever rain falls this weekend can't fall next weekend. Top 6, Schumacher, Hill, Alesi, Mansell, Frentzen, Brundle. That's been like that from lap 2. Top 12 being completed by Eddie Irvine and Rubens Barrichello. Irvine, who was in 7th and then spun off. He must have spun off because suddenly he found himself in 11th. Mika Salo right behind teammate Alessandro Zanardi, and Salo could be a bit of a surprise here this Sunday if he keeps that car on the black bit.
Well, currently, of all the new boys that have turned up in Suzuka, he's leading the pack, but he's got Frank Lagorche in the second of the Ligier Renaults directly behind him. But again, Mika Salo, who's raced here for 3 years in Formula 2000, will not maybe feel as intimidated or sort of basically afraid of these conditions as many of other people around him. This is something that you've got to be accustomed to and grew used to when you decide to make your career in motor racing in Japan. And also in Japan, being a racing driver, if you are not prepared to race hard in these conditions, you're not a racing driver, you're a whim.
So with 45 laps to go, we're getting very close to the 2-hour mark if we start racing on the next lap. And thanks very much, Bob. I was trying to work out which other driver we've lost because I couldn't find one. And it's JJ Leto who's disappeared somewhere off the circuit. We haven't seen it, but it's happened on the very first lap because he's not on our Tag Heuer computer.
Well, we did see 2 cars. One looked like we couldn't quite identify it, which appeared to be in the pit lane, and then suddenly they cut to a Hideki Noda's car, which was at the end of the corner, the sequence of corners that followed directly behind the pits, and Jean Todt walking back down to the Ferrari pits. And these conditions, in fact, are more akin to those of rallying, which, of course, was a branch of motorsport that Jean Todt rose to fame. And, in fact, he was the successful manager of Peugeot's World Rally Championship team.
Flavio, what do you think? Do we need a red flag and maybe stop until the weather gets better, or what do we do? Because we've had 5 laps behind the safety car at the moment, but the safety car rule was put in to have no red flags anymore, and all the problems of restarting a Grand Prix. Well, I don't think we can have another 45 laps behind the safety car, but we should go racing pretty soon. If I look outside of the commentary booth, there is less rain, but this is atrocious.
Yeah, this is bad on the straight. This is coming just simply from the wheels and tyres. But in fact, the part of the circuit prior to that has cleared up considerably. But we still have safety car on the track. And coming up to the end of the 9th lap and the start of 10. So there's no indication given anywhere. We just saw Jean Todt walking up to speak to, I presume, to Frank Williams, then Flavio Briatore and Ron Dennis to get their views. And one can only hazard guesses at what the purpose of those visits was. Well, the lights are off now on the safety car, so we're on lap 10, and at the end of the 10th lap, we will be racing here again in Suzuka.
For the moment, this will be the last lap behind the safety car. And I say for the moment because it's still grey outside, and if the weather turns bad again, there's no doubt in my mind that the safety car will be on the circuit again. The third time the safety car's been used.
I'm just looking
at Grand Prix.
Alan, I'm just looking at the back of Damon Hill's car, the safety light, the red light, it's mandatory in the Formula One. Look, well, you can see it on Michael Schumacher's car. Can you see it in Damon Hill's? You can see it on the ladies' Ferrari. It may just be in a slightly obscured part of the car around the back, but that is an area where there could be a small problem for the Williams-Renault team.
Well, it's mounted just behind the airbox in the bodywork, John, and it might be that extra rear wing that's mounted on the Williams, maybe in the way of the red light on Damon Hill's car. So fingers crossed for another first lap, another first corner, John. Somebody might try and be brave and try the long way around on that first corner, although Michael Schumacher has got the advantage. He can slow the pace right down into that last chicane, and then basically he's gone.
Indeed, and I'm quite certain that Michael will use every advantage possible. He will want to put as much distance between himself and the pursuing pack. Now, Damon is very clearly aware of what Schumacher's intentions may be, but of course he can only react after Michael Schumacher's actions, and Schumacher clearly has got the advantage. Of course, it then is a matter of getting into the first corner at racing speed since this heavy rainstorm, and track conditions will be different to those that they met prior to the safety car coming out. So caution is something that will be very, very important indeed. But really behind Schumacher, it's anybody's guess what will happen, as visibility will be virtually zero.
Another thing, John, where we see a lot of water here and that part of the circuit, even when the cars are gone, there's a lot of trees around this circuit, and that stops water from being blown away by the little wind there is.
Well, it tends to make a circuit feel very spooky, because the spray from the tires goes up into tiny droplets of moisture, and then it just hovers around, and with the wind effect that you get from racing cars traveling at speed, it's not really dissipating. It's sort of just being pushed up in the air, and then it sort of sprinkles back down again. And again, people not so much in the front 2 or 3 rows as we see here, but probably from the midfield back are going to have appalling conditions once again. Michael Schumacher back on the power. Jean Alesi caught napping, and you can see what happened. Damon Hill very quickly indeed sussed what Michael Schumacher was doing, and Jean Alesi fallen back, what, 50 meters?
That's secure for Damon Hill. Michael Schumacher leads at the end of lap 10, the start of lap 11, the restart basically of the Japanese Grand Prix. Schumacher leads Hill, Alesi. Then we see Nigel Mansell, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Martin Brundle, Then a big gap to Mika Häkkinen, Johnny Morbidelli, and we should see Gerhard Berger, Mark Blundell, and the rest of the field. Eddie Irvine accelerating hard, and behind him should be teammate Rubens Barrichello. That is the situation, but drivers taking things very easily down the main straight here at Suzuka. Lagorce being overtaken by Eric Comans after start-finish. I think there are people actually not using full throttle down the straight.
Well, I would think that's very sensible, particularly on the restart, because they don't know, as I mentioned a few seconds ago. And there we see Frank Lagorce paying the penalty of being maybe a little bit too ambitious. Contact with the barrier, left rear, looks to me to be damaged. And that, in fact, and there's 3 cars out. That's Pierluigi Martini in his Minardi. And there the second, Michele Alboreto in his Minardi Ford, driving off the track. I don't know where he thinks he's going to go other than try and park it in safety, but his car is driving. There doesn't appear to be any problem with that car, but maybe he's just decided, look, this guy's, I'm not in Formula 1 to drive, and this is not Formula 1. This is just something that's, well...
And if he does go touring cars, at least he's drying his sights on.
2 Minardi Fords out, along with Frank Lagorce in his Ligier Renault. And it looks to me that McKenny thinks he got punted up the rear, and he's just giving that sort of familiar Italian sign to his teammates, believing that it was Pierluigi Martini who was responsible. But look at the gap, the lead that Michael Schumacher, here we see just about, there it is, and a big, big impact from behind. Now that's, and Gerhard Berger, his engine as he came past the pits at the restart, sounded like it was missing 4 or 5 or more cylinders. So no big surprise, Gerhard Berger hasn't made it round.
So retirement 9 so far on lap 11, while Michael Schumacher just completes that 11th lap. He now has a very big gap over Damon Hill, 4.8 seconds.
And now, as we speak, the rain again heavier and heavier at start-finish straight. So when we've just had this restart, the weather looked like it had stabilized. Now rain falling, not as heavy as the monsoon rain we had some 20 minutes now ago, but sufficiently heavy. And the gap at the end of lap 11, almost 5 seconds. That was the amount of space that Michael Schumacher was able to open up between himself and Damon Hill in second place. But I think Damon has done the wise thing. He's not trying to challenge Michael Schumacher in exceptionally difficult conditions. Now, what we don't know is, with the rain that was more or less anticipated for the duration of the Grand Prix, what is going to happen about pit stops? What is going to happen about tyre changes? All this has been thrown completely into abeyance, and we're just going to have to wait and see, is Michael Schumacher's car running with, let's say, a 2-stop fuel load on board, or have they decided to put enough fuel in to enable them to do either 2 stops or go just for a 1-stop race?
Michael Schumacher, 2:02.421. That is a new fastest lap of the race in these conditions. And a big gap now with Damon Hill. Michael is pressing on regardless. He is driving at a pace he's probably comfortable with, but it's just a couple of seconds quicker than anybody else is comfortable with.
And just simply, he can see where he's going, he can see the road ahead of him, he can get a pretty good idea of where water is standing. And with rain falling, as I mentioned, basically on Saturday this morning and now, every lap is an adventure. You can never predict that consistency of track conditions is going to exist.
The gap, Frentzen to Mansell, 0.3 of a second. Frentzen to Brundle, 1.2 seconds. But where's Frentzen gone at the end of lap 12? Is he past Mansell, or is he still right behind him? He's still behind him. Damon Hill in second place behind World Championship and race leader Michael Schumacher. When we look out of our commentary booth, there's more and more personnel walking into race control. Team managers, Eddie Jordan is moved in there. Would they say, like, excuse me boys, stop this race, this is madness?
I would think that that's one of the sentiments that they're expressing. It may be done in a variety of languages, some of which will be understandable, some of which certainly won't. But conditions are exceptionally difficult indeed, and you're putting any driver into the situation where he's got to complete 53 laps or the 2-hour duration, where you have rain that's going to come in and out throughout the period of the race, and some of it may be literally massive monsoon raindrops. There may well be a move to put a safety car back out, or to postpone the race, red flag it until conditions can be maybe considered more stable. But whatever it is, we see team managers, personnel making their way from their respective garages up to race control, just I think to get clarification.
The gap at the end of lap 12, still 4.8 seconds. Schumacher and Hill running the same sort of lap times, and John, I think Damon's done a thing that, like, well, let's sit 5 seconds behind Michael, but at least I can see where I'm going.
I think that's the smartest thing that Damon Hill can do. He's not going to be able to race with Schumacher in these conditions. He's dropped back to just under 5 seconds. He's got clear visibility. He's under no threat whatsoever from Jean Alesi. He's a further 5 seconds behind. And that's intelligent driving, and it's good teamwork from the Williams-Renault team. They knew that this battle for points for the championship, it can be won here. It could be won by this man, and he was to win and Damon Hill not to finish. So they want to make sure that Damon Hill is running at the end to keep their championship chances. And remember, the Constructors' Championship is also up for grabs. So there's a double prong to their fork.
Well, that's a moment. If we look at the Constructors' Championship, Hill and Mansell score 9 points. Michael Schumacher, Benetton scores 10 points. So that gap would be 3 points if it stays as it is at the moment. We're on lap 14. Some 40 laps to go. If we make that before the 2-hour mark, but that is something I doubt very much indeed. 80 minutes to go, 40 laps, and 40 laps in these conditions, including a pit stop, is definitely more than 80 minutes. Now, if we were to get another safety car period, John, that would definitely change all the thinking teams have done before the race. They would use less fuel. I mean, when are you going to make a pit stop? What's going to happen? I mean, then, although it's a lottery, also the teams really have to think about that.
Well, there's a big shunt for Gianni Morbidelli. Both front corners off his footwork forward, and that again is the consequence. You can see that's at the R130, and look, he's just more or less gone straight off into the... Well, in fact, this is at the back of the pits, the quickest of the S's, the long left-hand corner. He's just lost control, shot off the track, hit the tower wall on the right-hand side on the outside. Fortunately, Gianni, short guy, feet well back from the front of the car, no damage to him, but that car again in a precarious part, well, it's off the circuit, but here we see, look at the tires, wheels flying everywhere, cars spinning. Now those were the front, right front, left front. Wheels went across the track. Fortunately, there you see one of them drunkenly making its way to the inside of that corner.
Trouble area highlighted on the top right of your screen with Gianni Morbidelli's stricken footwork. While the gap between Michael Schumacher, race leader, and Damon Hill, while Schumacher passes that footwork at the moment, is now 7.7 seconds. I have a feeling, John, that Damon Hill, if the conditions are like this, and on the right, incidentally, we just caught a glimpse of JJ Leto's Sauber Mercedes, and that looks in one piece, so maybe the car just cut out, actually. In fact, I think Damon's on a one-stop race. Well, Alessandro Zanardi has been passed by teammate. Oh, and that Martin Brundle.
And Martin was a man who was utterly dominant through Saturday's wet qualifying and Sunday morning's wet warm-up. And there you see heavy impact on the right rear of Martin Brundle.
Red flag.
So this race is going to be halted. There are cars in precarious positions. The conditions themselves are just about undrivable. I mean, a man... And there you see again a similar situation to Gianni Morbidelli, and that is just more or less where the pit lane starts. If you go about 100 yards behind that, now Marshall's crowding onto the track, waved yellow flags, very courageous indeed, because those waved yellow flags are appearing before the stationary red flag is out. Now, well, we see, yes, Michael Schumacher has again slowed right down to a walking pace, and he, in fact, is going to bring his car onto the grid, and he's being waved by the marshals to come to a stop just under the Marlborough Bridge, which is, in fact, about midway on the grid. Damon Hill doing likewise. So I'm sure many of those team managers who made their way up to race control will be very unhappy, very angry indeed. And Jean Alesi, using a little bit too much horsepower, he's shot out of the chicane and having to get the anchors out very quickly indeed to bring his car to a standing stop. Nigel Mansell, Heinz Harold Frentzen, fourth and fifth, and Mika Häkkinen, the surviving McLaren Peugeot. So the first 6 cars stationary on the start-finish straight, and Mark Blundell is the next one up. And there, Ron Dennis, he will be unhappy. I'm sure Jackie Oliver of Footwork Ford will feel likewise that this race has maybe not been run to the level of responsibility that they would consider to be correct. Here again, you can have a look and see, and that is, well, that's nice, Mark Fulton. That was a big, big, nasty moment indeed. Look at bits of car. And he went behind the car of Gianni Morbidelli. There's a marshal standing there. He didn't even know. A marshal got down on his hands and knees. He didn't even know there was an accident happening until he heard the bang, the horrible sound, the thump. Left front missing, right rear missing. Fortunately, no damage to Martin Brundle or to any of those marshals who were in position removing Gianni Morbidelli's Footwork Ford to safety.
The end of lap 15. The Japanese Grand Prix has been stopped. A red flag here at Suzuka. Mika Häkkinen running back to a place that's dry. Is he running back to the stewards? I think he is. I think he wants to go and see the race director to talk about decisions being made here at Suzuka. Well, I don't think we can actually look into the race director's room. Well, this is a replay of Martin Brundle's. No, this is Gianni Morbidelli's shunt, isn't it? No, it's Brundle's shunt. Oh, everybody very lucky indeed.
I mean, that's one of the most frightening accidents I've ever seen here in the commentary with Eurosport. I mean, Martin had no chance whatsoever. He was a passenger of his car. And there, I think, in fact, maybe there has been injury because that car has probably, there's marshals around, and this is, I suspect, the true reason why we have seen this race red flag. There has been an injury to somebody, and I suspect it's been one of the corner workers, Martin Brundle, making his way back to the pits along with Gianni Morbidelli. Now, one of those marshals may well have been struck by parts of bodywork, maybe a wheel and tyre, and that is a very concerning moment indeed, because those men are courageous. They go out in all conditions to retrieve a car. They were working on Gianni Morbidelli's Footwork Ford, and there we see him being taken to the ambulance, and he will be taken back to the medical center here in the Suzuka circuit. So, a very, very upsetting sight indeed.
The Japanese Grand Prix is being stopped, and there we see the marshal being hit by the McLaren. The race is stopped, and we're going to take a break here on Eurosport. We've had 13 official race laps at the Suzuka circuit, and the classification after 13 laps is Schumacher, Hill, Alesi, Mansell, Frentzen and Brundle. The gap between Schumacher and Hill is 6.863 seconds. Of course, Brundle is out of the Grand Prix. Thank you, John. Häkkinen, Morbidelli, Blundell, Irvine, Barrichello and Panis. While Morbidelli is out as well, Fittipaldi, Zanardi, Salo, Comas, Brabham and Gerhard Berger, who stopped as well. So out of those 18, 3 drivers will not take the restart. So we'll see 15 cars for the remainder of the Japanese Grand Prix. For the first time since the Italian Grand Prix, we've seen a red flag. Of course, the Italian Grand Prix, when Eddie Irvine ran into the back of Johnny Herbert and then started that chain reaction that stopped the race. And we've seen basically everything so far here today. Safety cars, rain. The only thing we haven't seen yet is a dry circuit, but there again, we might see that before the race is over, John.
Well, I think anything is possible here this afternoon. And just as we talk about anything is possible this afternoon, David Coulthard walks into the Eurosport commentary booth. And David's going to get himself seated and up to a microphone in a minute or two. But these conditions have been absolutely appalling in Suzuka. They're probably at their best right now. But no one knows, no one has a clue whatsoever as to what's going to happen to the remainder of this Grand Prix. But David, I assume that you've maybe got some insight or some knowledge of what's going on in the Williams team. Can you give us some idea of what the thoughts of Damon Hill might be, or Nigel Mansell for that matter?
Well, I haven't actually had the chance to talk to them, but certainly just going by their body language, and I can imagine they're very unhappy at the moment, because it's not for the drivers to say that we won't race, it's for the officials to say that it's too dangerous to race, and obviously now the conditions are changing, so they're all happily back out there in the cars. But I can imagine that a lot of the drivers will be fairly unhappy at this situation at the moment, because the only one who has a clear view of the circuit is Michael Schumacher, and then as you go second, third, fourth and down the field, you really are just driving into a blind wall.
So, people going into the pit at the moment. There's a Jordan, that's Barrichello, who goes into the pit, and Oliver Panis as well. Is that clever?
Well, I think it could be clever. They may well choose to make their pit stop now and put on fresh tyres, refuel their cars, because everybody's going to come back onto the grid and make a restart. So they couldn't do this under the red flag. And we've got one of the two, the Zanardi and the Ludas in as well.
The race will start under the safety car. So no overtaking. The race will start behind the safety car. Well, that's the first time we see that.
And the Ligier is the first out of the pits. The Jordan sitting down with Barrichello's car being attended to. And Ludas leaving the pits. It may well be more than just a pit stop for fresh tyres and rubber, or fresh tyres and fuel, because Barrichello, his car stopped in the pits. There you see the Ligier at the head of the pits waiting for the field to leave there. Ligier and the Ludas make their way out. Now, that may well be a very clever move on the part of the Ligier, the Ludas team. For Barrichello, it looks as if he's got a more serious problem, and he is lost. There is his car. So let's have a little watch on what happens on those two cars that are at the back of this line, because one may presume that everybody else is going to have to make a pit stop at some point.
I wonder if it's also is Tom Walkinshaw, obviously with his involvement with Benetton and Ligier, covering his bets, because it would be incorrect to bring Michael in under that circumstance, just in case the race was again stopped. But by bringing the last remaining Ligier in, maybe they get themselves a clever advantage, not having to stop again. They're now in full tanks, or half tanks as it will need to be to finish the race, and they may have just played their trump card.
Well, I think, David, when you want to stop being a Grand Prix driver, maybe team leadership management might be an avenue for you, because certainly you've got a mind on you like Tom Walkinshaw. Maybe is it being Scots? There's something up in Scotland that I don't know about.
Well, you know, John, we have to work a lot harder coming north of the border than our friends south of the border, and you're north as well, so maybe that's why we work that little bit harder.
Well, the captain about 20 seconds ago said it all while Barrichello leaves the pit. 37 remaining race laps.
And Ruben Barrichello, in a sense, is locked in because he had a problem. He's been able to get it rectified before the cars make it round at the end of this pace car lap. So there, the cars are about halfway around this pace car lap. And, of course, Rubens ought to be able to catch up to the end of the train and be back in the hunt.
Well, John and David, maybe the drivers have got a say in proceedings at the moment, because the race being started under the safety car regulations, I don't think the situation at the moment is as bad as it was earlier in the race.
I would think that the reason that this situation has been allowed, or the safety car has been put on the track, is to give the drivers a chance to reacclimatize themselves with the conditions, rather than just do the one pace lap then bang hard into a racing lap. But really, I think the safest thing is to allow the safety car to do a lap or a couple of laps, pull off, and let the restart with the cars quite well separated. At least it will allow everybody a better visibility than when they're all compressed together as they are in a standing start.
And we did see Nigel Mansell, John, pointing to Flavio Briatore and other people making, and maybe that's what he was saying, like, you know, in America we would do this, and it's not a bad idea.
Well, of course, in America, in IndyCar racing, they race in the rain on the street circuits, but on the ovals, there's no racing at all. And some of the procedures that they use or adopt for their particular genre may well have merit and could be applied or introduced for extreme circumstances as those we've seen here this afternoon in Suzuka. Really terribly disappointing penultimate round in terms of what we had hoped to see, a battle between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill. We hope we're going to see a battle royal between those two teams, and more teams now. I wonder, the Simtek, the second Lotus, making their way down the pit lane. There is Mika Salo, the young Finnish driver who was put into this car at the last minute, never drove it until Friday morning.
Well, Salo leaves the pit, the rain started again, and the lights on the pace car are out. So at the end of the next lap, we will start racing again. The lights on the pace car are out. That means at the end of the next lap, with 35 laps to go, we will have the third start of the Japanese Grand Prix, or the second restart, whichever way you want to look at it.
Well, there's the good news. You can actually see beyond the circuit, and that's very encouraging. That's one side of the circuit. That's the south side, or where we are on the south side, looking more to the north of the circuit. It isn't quite as clear as the view we've just seen, but still track conditions very difficult indeed. The standing water that was on the circuit at the beginning of the Grand Prix appears to have drained away, but there's still an enormous amount of moisture, and with an ambient temperature somewhere in the middle teens, well, if it doesn't rain, undoubtedly we'll get something approaching a drying line, but it's certainly not going to occur until pretty much late in the race. Now, Damon, be careful. Don't overtake Michael Schumacher. We know what happened to Schumacher when he did that to you in Silverstone. Draw alongside him as you did, but don't get ahead of him.
Well, John, the drivers that have taken on fuel on board are going to cover something in the region of 210 kilometers on one tank of fuel. I'm not sure whether that's possible, actually. Depending on how big the fuel tank is, I suppose. David, you should know.
Well, yeah, they can manage to make the race, certainly with the Williams anyway, but obviously I'm not sure what point you were making earlier because I wasn't here, but just one thing I'd like to say about when John mentioned about the standing water, one of the problems we faced with the cars today with the 10mm plank strapped to the bottom is, if you have running water going across the circuit diagonally, that plank actually works like a rudder and steers the car the direction of the water. So that when Katayama and Inouye had their spins in the start-finish straight, straight away, with my limited experience of running in the wet with the plank, that's the first thing I thought about, given against the old floors, which were just flat bottom, which when you actually hit water, you just tended to aquaplane.
And something that's a rather surprise to me, that in next year's regulations, when you've got to have a 50mm step in the chassis, we're still going to remain with this high-tech piece of equipment, the plank. Now, you look surprised at that. I was surprised. Apparently, that is in the regulations. The plank will remain in 1995.
Well, I think that's amazing. I didn't realise that was one of the rules, but I guess one of the things in its favour is that it has cut down the cost of replacing floors after every qualifying session and every practice session. And a floor costs in the region of £15,000, and if you were getting through 4 of those in a weekend, that's a lot of money. The plank actually cuts that down to maybe 1 floor a weekend.
Are those floors being damaged just from contact with the surface? Well, we're under racing orders again, and Michael Schumacher has Damon Hill right up the exhaust pipes, and Damon really was very aware indeed, probably more so than Michael Schumacher. But again, Schumacher gets the advantage on acceleration out of the chicane and uses the clear vision he has to put Damon Hill, who's pulled sensibly out to the left, into what is somewhat better visibility, but still it's a mess for anybody following Michael Schumacher.
Damon Hill very much with the program on the restart. John Alesi wasn't that much with the program. Again, he was caught out by the fact that the 2 drivers ahead of him had already started the race. So there's a gap to Jean Alesi, about 2 or 3 seconds at the moment, I would say. Now, whatever we see on screen, we shouldn't forget it, but of course there's also now the computer, John. The first 13 laps we run, there's a gap between Schumacher, Hill, Alesi, Mansell and all the rest, and that will be an aggregate result at the end of this race.
Well, Michael Schumacher, we can see just beginning to stretch marginally every corner, the advantage over Damon Hill, but of course Damon has to face virtually a whiteout of spray from the back of Schumacher's Benetton Ford, and really looking to use bits of the circuit that give him better visibility. And Damon, you look, there's the gap. It's just massive in the course of little more than 2 corners, and that's the advantage pole position offers. It's not just by starting on the pole, but in these conditions, and Michael Schumacher, a man who will use it to the absolute maximum.
Cars out of the race. First retirement, incidentally, was Johnny Herbert. Katayama and Inouye followed. Sorry, not first retirement, later a TODO route before Herbert was. But Michael Schumacher has got the race very much under control at the moment. Schumacher into the chicane, accelerating out. And I suppose, John, both Hill and Schumacher will be on a one-stop race with 34 laps to go in this year's Japanese Grand Prix. A Japanese Grand Prix that started wet. We had a lot of action, then a safety car procedure with when Johnny Herbert, Ukyo Katayama and Taka Inouye all spun off down the main straight. Then a red flag after an incident with Gianni Morbidelli, Martin Brundle and I just heard maybe 2 marshals that got hit by an out-of-control McLaren. We stopped. We restarted the race behind the safety car, and now we're racing again. The gap between Schumacher and Hill, 9.007 seconds. Fastest lap, 1:58.020, and again, that's an indication that things are getting a little better out on the circuit. Before the red flag, it was above 2 minutes, and that is another pit stop for Barrichello.
Yes, whatever the problem Barrichello has got, it's certainly brought him back into the pits. And that'll be very disappointing indeed for the young Brazilian, because he had a problem. He got into the pits, they rectified it, or they believed, but clearly it wasn't the case. But here's the race currently for the lead, Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill, and the aggregate of the first part and 2 laps into the second part is just over 9 seconds. So a little on the road, it looks a little more than 3 or so seconds. The computer all the time giving us the true position and not what the screen is showing.
Schumacher Hill, then the big gap to Jean Alesi. Flames coming out as the back of that exhaust. A lot of wheel spin, trying to get 800 horsepower to work for you. And Michael Schumacher, 1:57.285 on that lap. Again, being quicker. Damon Hill, 1:57.966. Jean Alesi, 2:005. Again, Schumacher and Hill in a class of their own, with Schumacher just a little bit faster at the moment.
And really, this is what we've seen throughout this championship battle between Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher. But the Benetton Ford team in position on the pit road. This is going to be certainly one pit stop for the Benetton Ford team. We don't know whether there's going to be more than one. What Benetton may well do is decide to, rather than risk more than that, we will put all the remaining fuel into our car and let Schumacher then run to the end. Now, I believe, and I'm quite sure it's the case with Damon Hill as well, he's going to have to come in at least once as well. And whatever the Benetton Ford team do, and they're the first of these 2 teams to show their hand, clearly Williams will then try and at least cover themselves with whatever the strategy they consider Benetton may well implement in the remaining laps of this Grand Prix.
Got it from fairly good authority, John, that Damon started the race with the possibility of doing 27 laps to start with, which incidentally was halfway into the race.
Well, I wonder which member of the Williams team was indiscreet enough to tell you that, Allard.
Who said it was Williams? So Michael Schumacher is still leading the race. Is he getting into the pits, or is he staying out? He's getting into the pits. Michael Schumacher, the first of the top 6 to make a regular pit stop to get on board a new set of Goodyear wet weather tyres.
And Allard, also be very careful. The pit lane itself may be considerably wetter than the track is, so Michael Schumacher has got to be very cautious indeed on that approach. He can't afford to come in too quickly because he doesn't know just how much water there may be.
Schumacher very relaxed on this pit stop. 8 seconds. His in-lap was a 58.8, and that in its own is a very good lap. Now, John, I wonder, did they bring him in too early? Because now Michael is in the midst of traffic. Damon's got a clear road ahead of him and can actually run away from Jean Alesi and maybe have this work for him this time.
Well, it may well be that the strategy that really has been in very much the domain of the Benetton Sport team this year will work, will turn around for Damon Hill and for Williams-Renault. Certainly, they've been the loser in many of the strategy calls throughout the season. They deserve one sometime.
The gap on our computer screen was 8.67 seconds, and Barrichello is the 11th retirement of the Grand Prix. The end of lap 17, it's all over for the young Brazilian, and we now have 14 cars running. The last of the runners is David Brabham in the Simtek Ford. But this man, at the moment, is leading the Grand Prix on the road, and I think he's far enough ahead to be leading on aggregate as well, John.
Well, of course, it'll all level out when we had Damon Hill come into the pits for his stop. Of course, the time gap between Damon and Michael Schumacher was much greater than that we saw on the track. But until Damon comes across start-finish line, and whoever is in second place, whether it is Jean Alesi, Nigel Mansell, we don't know. But Michael Schumacher certainly drawing the track amongst Alesi, Mansell and Heinz Harald Frentzen. Well, there is a gap between second and third, but that really will be revised because these captions were the captions that related to the last lap. Now it is Damon Hill leading, Jean Alesi second, Mansell third, Heinz Harald Frentzen fourth, Mika Häkkinen fifth, and where is Michael Schumacher?
Well, Schumacher is on the road behind Mika Häkkinen, but he's still in second place on aggregate.
And that's 14.9 seconds.
We've seen the first of the regular pit stops. Michael Schumacher has made it on at the end of lap 18. At the end of lap 19, he is 14.973 seconds behind Damon Hill on aggregate. Damon Hill is far ahead of the field, but of course, because the race was stopped, it all gets nice and confusing, John.
Well, we're talking something like 24, 25 seconds. That was the time, the total in and out, plus the stop too. But here's a battle going on between Jean Alesi in third, Nigel Mansell in fourth. And Mansell really is no man tougher on the circuit to battle with than Jean Alesi. And Mansell showing the kind of form, really, that everybody who's a supporter of this great champion believes he is capable of. Mansell taking the long route around, now going to dive up on the inside of Alesi. But will Alesi give him room? He is one hard man to pass.
And that might not be the corner to try and pass people. R130, 130R. Mansell again behind Jean Alesi in the Ferrari. On the road, they're very close together. In reality, Mansell is 5.4 seconds behind Jean Alesi. But where's Michael Schumacher on the road? That is the big question. The Williams team still not making any attempt on doing a pit stop for either Damon Hill or Nigel Mansell. And there's another car in the pits. That's Heinz Harald Frentzen with 30 laps to go. Where is Michael Schumacher? Schumacher cross start finish now. He is 18.7 seconds behind Damon Hill, and he lost 4.5 seconds on that lap.
That is traffic, Allard. That is traffic. But Damon Hill obviously has to take full advantage of the clear track, precisely what Michael Schumacher had the advantage as well. And there we're going back to this battle for third and fourth between Alesi and Mansell. Mansell looking all around the back of that Ferrari. And Jean Alesi, unquestionably one of the most difficult men in Formula One to concede positions. But Mansell, I'm sure, once he gets a feel, and the place that he appears to have an advantage is from here, round this very long, fast right-hand corner leading into the double apex left-hand spoon corner. Mansell takes a different line into the corner, gets himself positioned on the exit, and accelerates marginally earlier than Alesi, but the Ferrari top speed is high.
Ferrari top speed has always been very high indeed, but Mansell there struggling for grip, trying to get underneath that gearbox. He's further behind Jean Alesi than he was on the previous lap, showing himself in the mirrors, but Alesi probably doesn't really care.
Well, Alesi is also mega late on the brakes, and Alesi, thought for a second was going to come into the pits, but he was just protecting the inside line to stop Mansell forcing his way down, and of course Nigel then had to stay out to the left. Alesi has the advantage once again through the chicane, and Nigel, you can see, fighting to get the power down, to get traction to the rear wheels as Alesi sprints away, all the way down into turn one.
Damon Hill, 2 seconds a lap quicker than Jean Alesi, the man he leads by 21.7 seconds. Michael Schumacher is on the road, still second, but again losing 3 seconds to Damon Hill. This is not what Schumacher wanted. Now, I wonder, John, did Benetton go for a two-stop race? That's why they had to make, otherwise I don't understand why they brought him in now.
Well, they put in 8 seconds worth of fuel, and that, in my view, would not be sufficient fuel for the laps remaining, but we're just going to have to wait and see, because you with Damon Hill, you predicted lap 27, Mark Blundell, he's exiting, and there's an 80-kilometer speed limit, by the way, in the pit lane here this afternoon. But we don't know what point Damon Hill's going to come in. You say 27, we're on lap 22. So when Damon makes his stop, he then, of course, is going to drop back into the melee that Michael Schumacher himself is being bogged down in.
Well, lap 27, but John, there's, of course, a couple of laps we've run that are being deducted from our screen. Out of racing laps, I think we're on lap 25, but there's, of course, less laps because the race has been restarted. He is the fastest man on the circuit. He did that on lap 20, a 1:56.9 for Damon Hill, 56.912 to be exact. He's not going to come in on this lap, the end of lap 22. Let's see what the lap time is, and what's more important, the gap between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill.
Well, in days of yore, Nigel Mansell would have forced his way past, but on his return to Formula One, the thing that he is having to relearn is to race in a Grand Prix car. Being fast, and as he's shown us here this weekend, is only one part of the story. It's being able to use that car in a racing condition. Alesi, completely familiar with his Ferrari in all conditions. Nigel, illustrating a degree of caution, of prudence, certainly. I think it's sensible.
Alesi now being quicker and quicker. The gap is 23.475 seconds, and for the first time on aggregate, Jean Alesi holds second place, half a second ahead of Michael Schumacher, who is now back in third position. Mansell is fourth, although we see only 2 cars. Just think of Schumacher in between there.
Well, that's a pretty awesome thought, and, well, we're looking at a sight which I'm sure for Nigel Mansell is one that he would wish would disappear. You can barely see Mansell's car from that rearward-facing camera. And again, coming up to the part of the circuit where the strength of Mansell and the Williams-Renault appears to be greater than that of Jean Alesi. And eventually, Mansell's going to force his way through. He'll find that one particular point where Alesi's a little bit slower than previously. Mansell gets it right, and that will be positioned certainly on our picture, not necessarily on the road.
The Williams team is ready for a pit stop for either Damon Hill or Nigel Mansell. Whoever decided to come in first is going to come in pretty soon, because the mechanics are all out in the pit road. And Mansell, now he's got the drive. Now he can do it.
Well, Well, this is what and look at that. Jean Alesi, very, very, I mean, really, the power of that Ferrari is impressive. Nigel Mansell ducks back into the slipstream, but has to pull out of the throttle because Alesi refusing again to get onto the brakes until he knows Mansell isn't going to go anymore.
Alesi lapping nearly 2 seconds a lap slower than Damon Hill. What is the difference between himself and the race leader? Does Damon Hill have enough seconds in hand to come into the pits at the end of the next lap, to go in and out, change tires, and be ahead of Jean Alesi again? That is the big question. Michael Schumacher, who is behind Mika Häkkinen on the road, Häkkinen in 4th position. Schumacher still 3rd, now 1.3 seconds behind Jean Alesi, but ahead of Nigel Mansell. So what do we do without a computer, John, to keep track of all this?
Well, just watching on screen, look at Mansell using again the very wide exit and no sequence of S-bends directly behind the pit. And Jean Alesi, well, he's been a racer. He, I suppose, really thinks that this is his best. It is his best chance to be on the podium. And the rain has always been a great equalizer of ability and talent. But it makes me wonder if the Ferrari, it's not so great in the drive. Why is it much better, or apparently much better, in the rain? Or is that just simply the skill of Alesi in these most demanding of conditions?
2 third places back in Brazil and in Spain, in Barcelona, for Jean Alesi earlier this year. So 2nd place would not only be his best result this year, it would also equal his best result ever. While Mansell has got to go dive down the inside again and try to get the drive out of the corner and get into the slipstream. But that Ferrari is almighty quick down the straight.
And Mansell up alongside. Has he got? He has. He is. Oh no! What's going to happen? Oh dear me! What a moment when that was blind courage on the part of Nigel Mansell. And I don't know what to say about Jean Alesi. I mean, courage of a level which you rarely see. Mansell, under most normal circumstances, would have expected Alesi to concede. The word does not exist in Alesi's vocabulary.
New fastest lap of the race by Damon Hill, 1:56.597, and again being 2 seconds a lap quicker than Jean Alesi, who still has Nigel Mansell right behind him, although on aggregate that is more than 5 seconds. Schumacher in 3rd position, 2.7 seconds behind Alesi. So Häkkinen is 5th, Mansell 4th, of course. Irvine moves into 6th position, Frentzen 7th, 8th. Where's Frentzen gone? Fittipaldi is now 7th, 8th Frentzen, 9th Blundell, 10th Comas. That is the situation here at Suzuka. This is the top 6 after lap 24. We're on lap 25. So we're halfway into the race, basically, John.
And an enthralling battle between Nigel Mansell and Jean Alesi, and certainly that last attempt Mansell made to get past Alesi was on the part of the circuit we're just beginning to approach, and I can't wait to watch it just this next time.
And again, we see Nigel Mansell trying to be out very quick out of that corner. He's right in the slipstream of Jean Alesi. While out of your screen, Damon Hill is in the pits for his pit stop. Damon Hill in the pits. Now, are they going to get him out before Jean Alesi gets to start-finish? Damon Hill waiting for the fuel to go in. Damon is gone, a good pit stop, 9.2 seconds. Damon, watch the speed limit in the pits. Watch the speed limit, and I think he's just about got it. Oh, has he not? It is going to be close. Damon Hill, Jean Alesi, Nigel Mansell will meet. Ooh.
Well, there's a battle going on between Alesi and Mansell, and Damon Hill lost out. And this is going to be unfortunate for Damon because he just missed the opportunity to put himself almost, I'm not saying certain, but almost on the winner's podium. Now he's going to have to rely on the goodwill of Nigel Mansell to to allow him to get through, and I don't think Jean Alesi is going to be doing Damon Hill or Nigel Mansell any favours, because this man is leading the Japanese Grand Prix. Now he's going to have to make a pit stop very shortly, I expect, but he's going to make the full and take full advantage of his lead.
Of course, John, on aggregate results, it's still Damon Hill or Michael Schumacher leading the Japanese Grand Prix, while the McLaren team is now ready for pit stops. At Ferrari, I can't see anybody out yet, so they might go on a long time. And at Benetton, well, they're all in the garage. They've done their pit stop. Schumacher can probably finish the race on the amount of fuel he's got. The Williams team is still out there, so I suppose Mansell will come in very shortly indeed.
And Damon, in fact, you can see how much he's dropped back on that lap, but again, he's on fresh rubber, but with more fuel on board. And of course, it is important in these conditions particularly to just re-evaluate the feel of your car. Conditions with the car with extra fuel on, entirely different to the point. And there, Nigel Mansell, he in the second Williams now, making his way down for his pit stop. We don't know how many we're going to expect from Williams or from Benetton, but this is the first. We can try and judge it to some degree by the length of time the car is stationary. Anything above 8 seconds, and I would say Mansell will be on the track until the end.
Pit stop for Nigel Mansell. His car is stationary for 9.1 seconds, so it is 1/10 of a second better than Damon Hill did, while Michael Schumacher is trying to find a way past Mika Häkkinen. Well, he might as well wait, because I think Häkkinen's going to come in on the next lap anyway.
Well, he's actually got past him, so Mika Häkkinen, his team prepared for him for his first stop. And now Michael Schumacher really got to get his head down. He got bogged down very badly indeed as he returned to the circuit after his first stop. He was running second, a lap slower than the race leader, Damon Hill, and Damon really piled on the time and gave himself a very much more comfortable lead than I think the expectations are from the Benetton team. So this is a real battle now. Not the type of battle we had anticipated commentating on, but a battle between the strategists within the respective teams and the timekeepers. And here with our tag for your timing gear, we're doing our best to keep you up to date with as accurate information as we've got.
Michael Schumacher is 7.5 seconds behind Damon Hill on aggregate results. Hill and Alesi are 1.911 seconds apart. Damon incidentally lost 2.1 seconds on the whole pit stop sequence. He was half a second slower than Michael Schumacher on his in-lap and 1.6 slower on his out-lap. Well, Mark Blundell is out of the Japanese Grand Prix unless he's trying to find first gear, but he won't find it with the steering wheel out of his car. So Mark Blundell, another retirement of this year's Japanese Grand Prix.
Another part of the circuit again where you want to get out of your car as quickly as possible and let the marshals get that car equally to safety as quickly as possible. So Michael Schumacher making up time that was lost after his first pit stop. And in fact, looking at the lap speeds of Damon Hill, Alesi and Michael Schumacher, they're all around the 2 minutes. Now Schumacher into the high 1 minute 58, so clearly traffic all around the circuit as we have Mika Häkkinen in his McLaren Peugeot in for his first service.
Häkkinen will lose his place in the process to Eddie Irvine. Häkkinen 2:07.024 on his in-lap, and that is the slowest one we've seen so far. To give you some comparison, that's 9 seconds slower than Michael Schumacher did on his in-lap. So Damon Hill, who on that previous lap had to find a way past the remaining Syntec Ford of David Brabham, who we just saw in the background there, is fighting Michael Schumacher, the man in third position, some 5.4 seconds behind race leader, and the man second in the World Championship. Now this is an intriguing fight, because although it's a fight for position, they're not actually physically very close.
No, and again, it's where the team's strength will come into play, because it's up to the teams and people working behind the pit lane themselves to keep the men out the pit wall, and those therefore in contact with Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher with the situation. And really, it's very, very critical indeed for both drivers. Damon Hill currently leading and looking at 10 points. Michael Schumacher currently in third, looking at 4. So that will make for an exciting end to the World Championship in Adelaide, should the situation remain as it is.
John Alesi, 58.916. That was his lap. Damon Hill, 59.3. Damon's been a little slower on this set of tyres, but so has Michael Schumacher, incidentally, who's now got a clear road ahead of him and is doing 59.0. So I don't know whether it starts raining again at some part of the circuit. Maybe, John, the track now gets, although it gets drier, gets more greasy, as we've seen before, or maybe those new wet weather tyres do have to find a groove a little bit or something.
Well, ordinarily, a new set of tyres in this condition would feel a little bit slippery initially. They do like more water. This is coming to that time in a wet race where the surface doesn't have water, where the tyre really can use it to grip. Look at the way Damon's sliding around. Now, that's not much fun, and that will sort of take away a little bit of the commitment and almost the sort of the confidence, because while it might look exciting, might look amusing, it is costing time. Slides like that really are not going to help very much.
Damon Hill, 0.3 of a second ahead of Jean Alesi. Of course, do not forget, Jean Alesi still has got to make a pit stop. That is going to come very soon indeed, because the Ferrari mechanics are in the pit, waiting for the number 27 car of Jean Alesi. By the time we get back to start-finish, we're at the end of lap 28. 21 laps to go, I think, by the time we finish this lap. So 21 laps to the end of the Japanese Grand Prix. 5.8 seconds between Schumacher and Hill, while Jean Alesi is in the pit. There he is, the number 27 car in the pit. It's Damon Hill leading the Grand Prix again. 59.077 was his lap time. 2:01.9 for Jean Alesi. And that is, again, not a very quick lap on his in-lap. We see Michael Schumacher here a tenth of a second quicker than Damon Hill on this lap, so he's 5.741 behind. Alesi will fall back into third position. Although I wonder whether he might be behind Nigel Mansell by the time Mansell comes round again. We just wait and see.
Well, this is a Grand Prix which has certainly brought out a very fine performance indeed from Damon Hill. Michael Schumacher, who is fighting to reduce that 5.7-second deficit, is finding it extremely difficult, because Damon is doing an absolutely magnificent job. He wants to win. He wants to go away from here with those 10 points. If Schumacher finishes behind in second place, that's 6 points, so the deficit comes back down to 1 point. And, well, Damon Hill can do more than just make sure that he's on the man on the winner's podium.
Fastest man on the circuit currently on lap 30 is Eddie Irvine in the Jordan Hart. 58.731. That is still some 2 seconds slower than Damon Hill's fastest lap of the race, which incidentally has an average speed of 181 kilometers an hour. But currently, Eddie is the fastest man out on the circuit. Eddie Irvine in 5th position in the remaining Jordan Hart. John, although if the situation stays like it is, with Damon Hill leading the Grand Prix at the end of lap 30, and again a 59.017 for him, and now Michael Schumacher is right behind him on the road, and Schumacher will definitely be in second place. Schumacher 5.386 seconds behind Damon Hill, taking half a second out of the lead of the Englishman.
Well, he's just chipping away at it. Jean Alesi now confirmed in third. Mansell in fourth place. Irvine still in fifth. And we're waiting to see whether it is still Häkkinen or Heinz-Harald Frentzen who rounds out the top six. But Schumacher is just nibbling away at Damon Hill's advantage. Of course, Schumacher came into the pits earlier than Damon Hill, therefore his car is that little bit lighter. But of course, the tires have had that number of laps more, so it's very much even Stevens, and that's the reflection we're seeing here in their respective lap times.
Well, whatever it is, John, the cars are closely matched. And that is something we do want to see at the end of this championship. A championship that has all the possibilities of going down to the wire, going down to Adelaide in Australia. And it's between Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill. Also the Constructors' Championship, of course, to be decided in these last two Grand Prix of the 1994 Grand Prix season. 13 cars are in the race, with Damon Hill, Michael Schumacher and Jean Alesi the top three. Nigel Mansell is fourth, Eddie Irvine fifth, Mika Häkkinen is sixth, Heinz-Harald Frentzen, Christian Fittipaldi, Eric Comas, Oliver Panis, Mika Salo, Alessandro Zanardi and David Brabham complete the 50% of the starters that are still running in this race. .58.735 for Damon Hill. Michael Schumacher counters on that lap with a 58.6, so that's a tenth of a second. What's more worrying for Michael Schumacher is that Eddie Irvine's right behind him. Irvine lapping 0.6 of a second quicker than Michael Schumacher, and although Eddie is a good 45 seconds behind Michael Schumacher in reality, he is getting closer to the German, and I'm sure Eddie wants to pass him when he gets to him.
Well, we've seen what happens here in Japan when Eddie Irvine gets involved with the lead of Grand Prix. Last year, he was the centre of controversy, but Irvine currently lapping indeed the quickest man on the circuit. And this is a very fine performance indeed from the young Ulsterman on a circuit, of course, which he calls his home Grand Prix.
Eddie Irvine, who spent many years in Japanese Formula 3000, so has Mika Salo. And Salo keeps, even this morning, John, he said to me, these cars are so light to drive, it's unbelievable. He said, especially in the wet. He said, it's not, they are hard to drive, but physically, he said, you can send me out all day, no problem. 35 laps completed. We're on lap 32. The gap between first and second is 5.28 seconds. Alesi, Mansell, Irvine and Häkkinen complete the top six. Top 12 completed by the Lotus drivers Mika Salo and Alessandro Zanardi, and last runner is David Brabham in 13th. Incidentally, it's got all the looks that Mika Salo will drive the Lotus in Adelaide next weekend as well.
I'm just watching Michael Schumacher. He looks to me to be really struggling for grip all around the circuit. And the car appeared to me when the circuit was much wetter, it looked to me to be more convincing. He seemed to have a greater advantage in terms of the speed of the car. Now, as the track is getting, let's say, more slick, certainly more greasy, he doesn't seem to have any more advantage. The gap, of course, now, he has gone on that last lap just under a second faster than Damon Hill, down to 4.4 seconds. Whatever happened on lap 32, he found a bit of extra speed.
Another man that's got a fine speed is Nigel Mansell, who runs very wide on that corner. I don't know whether that was done intentionally.
I would say that was a momentary lapse, and Nigel gathered it all back up again, and well, he's coming close to the man with whom he's been battling throughout this Japanese Grand Prix, a man he hoped he would have overtaken during the pit stops. Well, Formula One is tough, and nothing comes tougher than Jean Alesi.
Mansell a second quicker than Jean Alesi on that previous lap. Damon Hill, as John said, 9 tenths slower than Michael Schumacher. But the gap 4.4 seconds, 26.49 between Alesi and Schumacher. Alesi and Mansell's got 6.995. Mansell's got 12.3 seconds over Eddie Irvine, but Irvine is nearly a second quicker than Nigel Mansell at the moment. Also, Irvine running ahead of Mansell on the road, incidentally. It's completely dry in Suzuka. Well, the track isn't, but there's no rain coming out of the sky, John. So, waiting to see what happens with 26.5 laps to go in this Grand Prix. And Eddie Irvine's gone into the pits. Eddie, who is making his way to the Jordan pits for his one and only pit stop of this year's Grand Prix. Michael Schumacher, again, a second quicker on this lap than Damon Hill. Both drivers having a clear road ahead of them. And Schumacher basically doesn't need to overtake Damon Hill. He's just got to get within that window of time he had.
Well, good stop from the Jordan team. Irvine back out. And the one-stop strategy, he pulls back onto the track, just getting in ahead of David Brabham, and that's a little bit of a relief for Eddie Irvine not to have to find a way past the Simtek Ford. And the one-stop strategy, and Nigel again using the long way around the corner, but in fact almost getting into trouble in the process. And again, Nigel, what are you doing? 2 corners in a row where you've made errors of judgment, and you can't afford to do that.
So John Alesi's got some relief, at least in his mirrors, where Nigel Mansell is getting smaller and smaller. So is the gap between Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher. Ooh, that was a big slide.
I'll tell you what, Mansell did very well indeed, and that's basically experience. Many other drivers in that situation would have been in the wall. Mansell gathered it up. He'd been in trouble the corner previous to the one we've just seen in replay. So this is a real test of stamina, of concentration, and also a desire to win, to be a racing driver. And I would predict when Nigel Mansell finishes this race and ends up in Adelaide in a few days' time, he's going to be one sharp racing driver.
Damon Hill's lost a lot of time on lap 34 because he had to lap Alessandro Zanardi's Lotus. Now the gap between Schumacher and Hill comes down to 1.4 seconds. Zanardi lapping 2:08, which is some 10 seconds off the pace at the moment, but 9 seconds to be exact. But of course, Schumacher has got the same problem now. He's got to find a way past that Lotus. Basically, Damon's lost a second and a half on that lap to his own pace.
Well, traditionally, Damon has been not as incisive in overtaking as Michael Schumacher, but in these conditions, I think that prudence and caution is a very sensible emotion to use in these very, very hard and demanding circumstances. Here we see in Suzuka, but Michael Schumacher, well, we have to maybe get a little glimpse to see whether he can use the parts of the circuit where his strengths are at the greatest and not get lost, get trapped into the pace at Zanardi, which is a very slow pace by that of the race leader, and therefore can continue this battle with Damon Hill. And Damon, a little bit of a slide in Spoon Corner. There you see the difference between them on the road. Schumacher easily past Zanardi. So the pendulum seems to be swinging now back towards favour of Michael Schumacher. But at what point do you anticipate they will be in for their second stop?
And are there going to be any second stops, of course, John? That is the big question. Is there going to be one for the Benetton of Michael Schumacher? Is there going to be one for the Williams-Renault of Damon Hill? That is the big question. The end of lap 34. Damon Hill crosses the line now. His lap time, a 1:58.699. Michael Schumacher is getting very close to Damon Hill. Michael Schumacher is only half a second behind. He was 9/10 of a second quicker than Damon Hill on that previous lap. Michael is pressing on regardless.
In reality, all Michael Schumacher has to do is literally just close up to within a second, as you will see it on the screen, of Damon Hill, and he will then be leading the Grand Prix. And I would imagine that that would be the tactic that the Benetton Ford team will try to employ. I don't think they will want to see too much heroics from Schumacher, because once he has the lead in terms of the overall times, the fact that he runs behind Damon Hill on the road, well, that's irrelevant. 15 laps to go.
Until the end of the Japanese Grand Prix, with Michael Schumacher 0.484 seconds behind race leader Damon Hill, while the man in 7th position, Eric Gomez, comes in to make a pit stop. So just over 14 laps to go in this year's Japanese Grand Prix. 14 nail-biting laps. Nigel Mansell very late on the brake.
Well, what happened was Alesi came out of that little right-hand curve, ran very, very wide. Mansell saw what was happening. He put himself onto a different part of the track. He took a very round the outside of the corner line, trying to get some advantage to get himself closer to Alesi as they come down to this, the favourite part of the circuit for Mansell to mount a challenge on Alesi. But of course, again, in the case of these pair, Mansell, if he overtakes Alesi, he will still be behind him overall. He will have to then draw out something like 5 or more seconds to ensure he is in 3rd place.
New race leader Michael Schumacher leads Damon Hill by 1.1 seconds. The end of lap 36. Michael Schumacher has retaken the lead in this year's Japanese Grand Prix, lapping a second, 1.6 seconds quicker than Damon Hill at this moment. And Michael does not need to do anything more unless he has got to go in and make another pit stop. John Alesi lost a lot of time on that lap, 2:0:05, suddenly a long, long way off the pace.
Well, Mansell and Alesi have had this battle more or less for the entire Grand Prix, and there's the view looking back, and that's pretty much what Mansell will see, nothing but grey with a bit of a red shape of Alesi's Ferrari. This part of the circuit, the long sweeping curves directly behind the pits complex in Suzuka, no way to pass here whatsoever. And we're back to race leader by 1.1 seconds, Michael Schumacher.
Of course, it's a funny way, maybe a funny feeling for Michael Schumacher leading this Grand Prix, because on the road he is behind that car number 0. There we see Damon Hill ahead of him. Damon and Michael, and if it would stay like this, the gap between the man driving for this man and the man driving for, well, we just saw his gap, Frank Williams, the Michael Schumacher and Damon Hill, of course, will be 9 points by the time we get to Australia, and then it'll take a little miracle for Damon to win the World Championship.
Well, Michael Schumacher's got Mika Salo between himself and Damon Hill on the road, and that's a way that Michael Schumacher could lose the lead of this Grand Prix, because he'll have to find a way past this Suzuka specialist as well. Damon Hill having successfully achieved that, but the gap between Schumacher and Hill extended to further seconds, and that was really just because of Mika Salo, who's doing nothing wrong at all, but there are points on the circuit where passing is possible, and here it is one of those that, well, unless Salo moves over, and he's done so, and a very good use indeed of the mirrors from this Formula 1 debutant, and that's a man maybe we could see a great deal more of in Formula 1 in the future, if he's got a good enough brain to be aware that the race leader is coming up to lap him in these conditions. That's a guy I would like to see in Formula 1, and maybe less of some of the other ones who are there simply because they've got a big bank balance.
Oh, John, let's not forget, in 1990, Mika Salo was fighting with Mika Häkkinen for the British Formula 3 title.
And really, in many respects, it was a great loss that Mika wasn't able to finalise a programme. He had a programme with Paul Stewart Racing to be in the 3000, but that evaporated, and his options were rather restricted. He chose Japan, taken him 3 years to get into Formula 1, and here he is.
Damon Hill trying to find a way past Oliver Panis, and he's done so in the process. So traffic playing a part now at this moment. And of course Panis, also Renault-powered, but also owned by Flavio Briatore. Well, the car is anyway.
Well, one would make an assumption that we'll see exceptional cooperation from Monsieur Panis when the race leader, Michael Schumacher, comes across the line for the 38th time, and the lead right now is equal. Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher are side by side in this Grand Prix. Well, it's now changed to 3.3 seconds because the computer gave us all the zeros. So once again, Schumacher increasing his lead over Damon Hill as this interminable battle goes on.
Battle Royal.
Well, certainly Mansell, I would say, or anticipated, will be sharp as a needle when he gets to Adelaide for the final of his 3 return Grand Prix. And this is really the best, if you like, tonic Nigel Mansell could have taken. He wasn't race sharp when he went to Jerez for the European Grand Prix 3 weeks ago. He came here and looked really impressive, quick all the time, but what he was lacking was race mileage, and a battle like this is absolutely fantastic to see Mansell being absorbed in for the entire 39 laps that we're now on. And, you know, a driver coming out of a championship in America where you've got a different style, a different view of racing, getting into these highly nervous, very, very fast reacting Formula One cars in a race condition is an entirely different situation to simply just going out and lapping in practice or in qualifying.
When Alesi made that impressive debut, 1989, the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard, it was Nigel Mansell's 100th Grand Prix, exactly 100 Grand Prix between Mansell and Alesi. 100 Grand Prix of experience, but most of those 83 Grand Prix Alesi has driven. Going to be really quick here. I think 67 has been done in a Ferrari, John.
And many a person would say that was the biggest mistake of Jean Alesi's career. When he left Tyrrell, he had options to go to Williams, for example. And because a peak of fit, let's say, or fit of peak, whichever it was in his case, he was unhappy that the choice of driver for Williams in 91 did actually go to Nigel Mansell and not to Jean Alesi. But his passion and his heart lies in Ferrari, and he reckons that the longer he stays there, the more prospect he has of, first of all, winning in a Ferrari, and then ultimately winning a Drivers' Championship.
Let's not forget, Alesi's best result is still a second place. While Mansell has won the World Championship back in 1992 when he was driving for the Williams team. Michael Schumacher now not so very much quicker than Damon Hill, 0.4 of a second, but he's got 3.7 seconds in hand. But one little error could throw it all away again. And that's interesting, John. The Benetton pit is ready. Thanks very much, Bob, for pointing that one out.
And that's just happened in the last seconds. I was scanning the pit lane to see if any team were preparing for a pit stop. And it's just very, very suddenly indeed they've leapt onto the pit lane. And this is going to be Michael Schumacher's second stop. We have to wait to see whether the Williams team had enough fuel on board to enable them to make it to the end and take 10 points.
Well, John, again, Mansell the long way round. Now, he should be able to get a better drive out of that corner, but the gap is still there. If we go back...
Michael Schumacher, is just into the pit lane now, and we've got to keep a very close eye because this is the opportunity, I would say the final opportunity for Damon Hill and for Williams to score maximum here in Suzuka.
So, Damon Hill is back into the lead of the Grand Prix. Is this going to be a very short pit stop for Michael Schumacher? It is. There's hardly any fuel gone into that car, John, and that was what they call in America maybe a splash and dash or dash and splash, whatever they call it, but they just needed that little bit, maybe 25, 30 litres of fuel.
Well, the whole strategy for everybody here went out the window because with the red flag, with all the laps behind the safety car, it was clear now that the Benetton team had a two-race strategy in mind. What we have to do is, again, look directly across from where we're sitting to see is there any activity from the Williams team, and I have to say they're all standing around looking quite relaxed.
Well, John, just before the race, I was talking to race engineer David Brown, that's Damon Hill's race engineer, and the only thing he said was, I have a plan. Well, maybe the plan works. 10 laps to go for race leader Damon Hill.
And the most important thing is that if it has worked, it's the most appropriate decision the team has made all year, and the most important place to make the right decision.
Laps to go before the end of the race. 9.5, the end of the Japanese Grand Prix. Damon Hill is leading this race on the road and on aggregate. Remember, it's a two-part race. The race was stopped after 15 laps, then the first 13 were as a result, and then we have 37 laps more, so in total we'll have 50 laps. P1, lap 9 on Damon Hill's pit board with 9 laps to go. But what is the gap between himself and second placeman Michael Schumacher? Because I'm sure Michael will be ahead of John Alesi and Nigel Mansell. John, there is something else I wonder. It's Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who's been mighty all weekend in the West, cannot keep up with the pace.
14.5 seconds, that is the time remaining with 9 laps, and that is, in my mind, an impossible task. Remember, there is traffic all around the circuit. Michael Schumacher has got fresh tyres, he's got more fuel on board, but to find, in effect, 15 seconds in 9 laps, well, I can't see it happening. And the Williams team have got a strategy which has undoubtedly been the right choice, whether it's by fortune, good luck or whatever, it's been the right, and it means that if positions remain as they are for the remaining laps in this Grand Prix, we are in for an absolute scorcher.
So, this weekend
Australia.
This weekend started very exciting with that almighty qualifying session on Friday afternoon, I beg your pardon, and it's going to end spectacular with 8.5 laps to go in this year's Japanese Grand Prix. That is the gap between John Alesi and Nigel Mansell, although Mansell is right behind him. But the gap between Damon Hill, race leader, and Michael Schumacher in second at the end of lap 41, it was 14.599 seconds.
Well, the pit board for Damon Hill is saying plus 14.5 Schumacher lap 8, and that was the gap on the previous lap, not the lap that Damon, of course, is completing, so we will have to wait for Schumacher to come across start-finish line. Damon crosses now, so the countdown begins. Before we know what is the scenario, is Schumacher going to be destined to be second, or will some miracle in the hands of Michael Schumacher see that lap whittled away?
Michael Schumacher crosses start-finish. He is 14.1 seconds behind Damon Hill. Alesi third, Mansell fourth, Irvine fifth, Hakkinen is sixth, but Hakkinen is half a second ahead of Heinz-Harald Frentzen in seventh position.
Nigel Mansell getting a sign from the Williams team, -5 on John Alesi, but also a message, turn on the oil pump. William and Nigel getting the back end of the Williams starting to drift much too early in that double right-hand corner of the first two turns on this Suzuka circuit. In his pursuit, 5 seconds is what he requires to be on the podium alongside his teammate and the man battling for this World Championship. And Damon Hill now must feel, beginning to feel at least, that the luck that sometimes he feels that has not gone with him has turned around here, and he's done an absolutely superb job all the way through the most difficult conditions of any Grand Prix for a very long time.
14.167 seconds was the gap when it was 8 laps to go. What is it going to be with 7 laps to go? Don't forget, I cannot see a lot of traffic ahead of Damon Hill. There's only basically Eric Comas who is crossing start-finish now when Damon exits that chicane. And there is also Oliver Pannes in between Damon Hill and Michael Schumacher on the road. Damon's lap, a 1:59.072. That's what he's been doing for the last, let's say, 50% of the race so far. 7 laps to go. The gap between Michael Schumacher, who is coming onto the straight, and Damon Hill. What is Michael Schumacher's time? It is a 1:56.8, 11.9 seconds. Michael Schumacher is on the limit. This is going to be a grand finale. Frank Williams on the left, Richard West on the right.
And that has taken something out of Frank Williams. He cannot believe that Michael Schumacher has pulled something like 2.5 seconds out of the lead of Damon Hill. This on lap 44 of 53. And this is really something that I hadn't expected, but suddenly Schumacher somewhere has dug very deep indeed and found, well, a massive increase in lap time.
56.894. That comes close to the fastest lap of the race earlier from Damon Hill. Damon, who, well, I don't know whether he's heard it on the radio. Maybe he's got to wait until he comes past. Maybe he thinks he's safe. Well, he's got 7 laps to go to win an all-important Japanese Grand Prix, an all-important victory for Damon Hill and the Williams team, because not only would it bring him back to within 1 point of World Championship leader Michael Schumacher, it would also mean that Williams is leading Benetton again in the Constructors' title.
And a comfortable lead it will be, because Nigel Mansell has done a great job all afternoon and has supported the Williams team in the manner in which he was expected to do. But here, race leader Damon Hill coming up to complete lap 44 as Michael Schumacher makes his way up to that final chicane. And Damon crosses the line. 1:58.5 was his lap time. Michael Schumacher exiting now chicane. And at some 4 or 5 seconds, in trouble exiting there, trying to get power down just a little bit too much. And crossover, keeping the car on control. 10.089 seconds, 1:56.6. Still 2 seconds a lap faster than Damon Hill can achieve, but I don't think it's enough. I just can't see if Michael Schumacher can reduce the lead. Well, he can reduce the lead clearly, but get himself into position to challenge before the checkered flag comes out.
Well, this finish was definitely worth getting up early for on that Sunday morning in Europe.
You know, all this has been going on, and behind the top 4, there's been a little private battle going on between the Jordan team and the McLaren team. Eddie Irvine running in 5th, and Mika Hakkinen running in 6th. Now, Ron Dennis, the McLaren team, they're into the penultimate race with their Peugeot engine, and that's the engine that's going to be in the back of Eddie Irvine's car and Ruben Barrichello's car, we believe, for 1995. And I'm sure the little bet that was placed between Ron Dennis and Eddie Jordan will be paid up in less than the 70 days that I think Ron Dennis said was required. Normal sort of payment of debt.
Behind Mika Hakkinen is still Heinz-Harald Frentzen, less than half a second behind the Finn, and they're not running very closely on the road, I must say. But there's Frentzen, who crossed the line now and is now 44 thousandths of a second behind Mika Hakkinen. So there's another battle going on without actually 2 cars physically being very close together indeed. Damon Hill crosses the line for the 45th time. 5 laps to go. What is the gap between himself and Michael Schumacher?
Well, a better exit for Schumacher this time. Got the power on, about the tail slide. And we have to see how much more time Michael Schumacher has carved out of the lead. Again, almost another 2 seconds, 1.8. The gap now down to 8.3 seconds. this lap 46.5 to go. It's going to be, I mean, I can't bear the thought of what, you can see faces of Frank Williams and all the large diamond vision screens around the circuit. They're getting different pictures some of the time to those we have on the screen. Fuji TV, the host broadcaster, are focusing on Frank Williams.
Happening out the back, but it could well be influenced by this back marker. 4 laps to go, and if the pace is maintained at the present, in my mental arithmetic says that Damon Hill's going to win this race by a second. But it's that close. It really is that close. When just 4 laps to go, Damon Hill leads, Schumacher second, but there are other people in this race. Alesi is still third, Mansell is still 5.5 seconds behind the Ferrari in 4th place. Eddie Irvine is some 40 seconds behind Mansell in 5th place, and Irvine finished 6th in his first Grand Prix at Japan last year. He's improved 1 place this year. Mika Häkkinen is currently 6th, and that is the man who finished 3rd last year, this year in a McLaren Peugeot. And in 7th place is Frentzen, 8th is Fittipaldi, 9th is Comas, 10th is Parnis, 11th is Salo, 12th is Zanardi, 13th is David Brabham, still just 1 lap short. But it's the race at the front, and here is Damon Hill coming up behind the Lotus. And sadly, being behind the Lotus through there, that may have cost Hill the race. He's going for the inside. He must get through. He does, but he still would have lost a few moments. Fantastic, with 3 laps to go. Damon Hill has, and Mansell is having a go at Alesi. But again, he's into the chicane and out of it. Well, it may have taken a long time for the Japanese Grand Prix to get going, but my goodness, it is flying now. Absolutely, Rob. We don't think we're going to know the final result until the cars literally cross the line. But let's just reflect back on how we got in this situation. A great start from Damon Hill has been all important for his challenge here today. He stayed on the road in the very, very treacherous conditions in the first part of the race. He did nothing wrong then, and the Williams team have had the right pit stop strategy. 1 stop was the way to go. For Schumacher, got away on the first start superbly, but for Benetton on this occasion it's been the wrong strategy, surely stopping twice, and as a result he got bogged down in traffic, and that's given him so much work to do now in the later stages of the race. Jean Alesi gained. This has been a superb drive for Jean Alesi. He gained from a tremendous start that got him ahead of Nigel Mansell. He was behind him on the grid, an advantage that Mansell has never been able to get by. And finally Mansell, well, I'm sure frustration is going to be the word for his weekend. Frustration in qualifying when he was not able to have a run in the dry, potentially get on pole, and certainly frustration for following Jean Alesi. But here is the real battle. Damon Hill just ahead still of Michael Schumacher.
And while we're concentrating on that, a quick word for Mika Salo, who has just been passed by Michael Schumacher, because the driver is in 10th position ahead of his teammate Sandro Zanardi in his first Grand Prix. Hill has crossed the line. It was 5.2 seconds. 2 laps to go. 2 laps to go, including the one that they are on now. It was 5.2 seconds. Schumacher goes across the line, and it's 4.2 seconds. I'm beginning to think that Damon Hill is going to do it.
Yep, I agree with you. It should have been 3.4 if Damon Hill was, or Schumacher was going to catch Damon Hill. This is looking very good. It could be traffic induced, and let's just hope that both these drivers can have a clear run now for just the next 2 laps, or certainly none gets advantage.
Oh, he's gone under the crossover point. You see him lock up his left front wheel, and it's looking a bit ragged here. He's got to keep it smooth for the rest of the lap.
Yes, smoother than that, and that probably will have cost him points.
2 laps to go. 2 laps to go, including the one that they are on now. It was 5.2 seconds. Schumacher goes across the line, and it's 4.2 seconds.
I'm beginning to think that Damon Hill is going to do it.
Yep, I agree with you. It should have been 3.4 if Damon Hill was, or Schumacher was going to catch Damon Hill. This is looking very good. It could be traffic induced, and let's just hope that both these drivers can have a clear run now for just the next 2 laps, or certainly none gets advantage or deficit, because if that's the case, Damon Hill will win the Japanese Grand Prix.
And as I said, if he does that, he will be on a flyer in Adelaide. So 7.2 miles to go when they started this lap, and they're now through the S-curve, down towards the Degner curve, halfway round the lap when they go under the crossover. And you'll see that coming up in just a moment. You're looking at Michael Schumacher, who was 4.2 seconds, and there is Damon Hill, and he's coming up behind Christian Fittipaldi. And Christian Fittipaldi is well down the field. He's in 8th position, and he's let Damon Hill through.
And Damon Hill really driving superbly. This must be the most pressure that Damon Hill has ever been under as he lights up the brakes once again. He knows perfectly well that to win this race is going to be essential to really preserve his championship chances. He will be being kept informed by Frank Williams, by the team, of that gap to Schumacher. He's having to absolutely wring everything he possibly can out of himself and the car to keep ahead and try and win this Grand Prix.
Yes, and he's coming up to the chicane for the last time but one. The chicane leads into the last turn, and the gap was 4.2 seconds. There is Michael Schumacher. You can see that there is very definitely a dry line emerging now as they prepare to start the last lap of a sensational Japanese Grand Prix. And Damon Hill has crossed the line. The gap was 4.2 seconds. Here is Michael Schumacher approaching the start of his last lap, and the gap as he goes across the line is 2.45 seconds. Damon Hill, and on the previous lap, Schumacher took 1.8 seconds out of Damon Hill's lead. It's going to be something like half a second or a second if they keep up the pace that they're doing now. Wow!
And clearly traffic playing a big part in what's gone on here. Hill losing 2 seconds to Schumacher because of that traffic. Following Morbidelli, probably we saw the moment when Hill got sideways out of the hairpin. Now it could be Schumacher's turn to get held up, but it's probably all going to depend on what happens to the back marker ahead of Schumacher on this final lap.
Oh, the slide from Damon Hill. He's really on the ragged edge there. He's into his last half lap now, because he's gone under the crossover point. You see him lock up his left front wheel, and it's looking a bit ragged here. He's got to keep it smooth for the rest of the lap.
Yes, smoother than that, and that probably will have cost him 0.3 of a second a lap, and at this pace, with a gap between them, that could be critical.
2.4 seconds it was, but Michael Schumacher was lapping 1.8 seconds faster on the previous lap. The two team bosses, Frank Williams and Flavio Briatore, are consumed with excitement, as I am. Now, Hill is approaching the chicane. This is the last time, and I'm looking for the checkered flag now for Damon Hill to come home, completing his race distance. But has he completed it when he does so as the winner of the Japanese Grand Prix to close the World Championship gap between himself and Michael Schumacher to 1 point as they go into Australia? Or will it have increased to 9 points? Well, we'll know the answer very soon. Damon Hill takes the checkered flag, but we wait for Michael Schumacher. Aggregate time, I remind you, is what matters. Here is Schumacher. Now he's got somebody in front of him. Is he going to be delayed? 3.36 seconds. Damon Hill wins the Japanese Grand Prix and takes his 6th win of the year to close the World Championship gap between himself and Michael Schumacher to 1 more. Oh! Mansell goes ahead of Alesi, and he's done it on the track. He's not going to do it on aggregate, but Nigel Mansell puts his hand out of the cockpit and says, "There we are, folks. I'm back." And indeed he is. And that means to say that Williams have got 14 points, and they now lead Benetton by 12 points in the Constructors' Championship. What an absolutely sensational Japanese Grand Prix. A well-deserved, brilliant victory for Damon Hill, who started this race under the most terrific psychological pressure, has resisted it and won for the 6th time. And the world champion, oh no, Damon waves both hands out of the cockpit. He's probably getting messages and giving messages over the radio. It's a long way to Japan, but it's been worth every millimetre of it to see a truly brilliant drive by 2 superb drivers. Let's not overlook the fact that Michael Schumacher was second. And incidentally, whilst I'm giving laurel wreaths, hats off to Jean Alesi, who has taken 3rd position for the 4th time this season. That'll help him a little in the World Championship. And let us not forget that Nigel Mansell has now completed his first Grand Prix since 1992 in a fine 4th position. He's demonstrated fitness and stamina. He's got those vital 4 World Championship points for Williams. He can be proud of himself, as can Eddie Irvine, who finished 5th. Heinz Harald Frentzen, who took a point for Sauber in 6th position. Mika Häkkinen 7th. Christian Fittipaldi 8th, 1 lap behind. Eric Comas 9th, a brilliant 10th position in his debut Grand Prix for Mika Salo and Lotus to please Honda and Mugen, whose engines they use. Olivier Panis 12th. David Brabham up to 12th, Panis 11th. Brabham up to 12th position ahead of Zanardi. And Patrick Head, the technical director of the Williams team, is with Tony Jardi.
Patrick, many congratulations. What a simply stunning race. How do you feel now?
Very pleased. Obviously, we've slightly been the underdogs since Jerez, and Damon drove a fantastic race and just made it in difficult conditions, so we're very pleased. Yeah, now it's down to Australia and get it all right for Australia.
Different strategy this time.
Well, we played a strategy as we think it appropriate at the time, and I don't know, by 3 seconds it seemed to work out well today.
So you're obviously jubilant. Have you spoken to Frank?
I've just literally seen him for a second. Yeah, he's very pleased. Yeah.
Many congratulations.
And I was going to say, before I say well done, Damon, as he receives Nigel Mansell's congratulations, how very, very nice to see that the first person who congratulated Damon Hill on closing the World Championship gap and achieving his 6th victory of the season after a brilliant drive was his chief rival, Michael Schumacher. Jean Alesi and Nigel Mansell embrace after a practically race-long battle for 3rd place. This has been a vintage Grand Prix.
It has indeed, and we thought that battle looked fair on the track, and there is the living proof of it. Nigel Mansell coming up, congratulating them. 2 wonderfully courageous drivers battling it out for nearly 2 hours in difficult conditions. But the World Championship will, of course, go down to the wire now to the Australian Grand Prix, but this victory is going to be more important, I believe, than any other for Damon Hill. More important because it really will charge him up. He knows that he's conquered some of the hardest conditions, some of the most difficult conditions. He's withstood the pressure. He's delivered when it really was absolutely critical. And that, I'm sure, will provide a tremendous boost to him to go into the Australian Grand Prix with a very real, genuine belief that he's got a chance of being world champion. If he'd won this race because Michael Schumacher had dropped out in front of him, he would have had nothing like the degree of confidence that he will have now.
Here, and you saw Nigel Mansell being congratulated by Patrick Head, the old master, if I may call him that, or he probably won't like it very much, who will be having words with me afterwards for doing so. Nevertheless, he is the oldest man in the race, and he's driven one of the best races of all here at Suzuka, which has lived up to its... Oh, I say nothing for the moment. Drink it in. Phil and Oliver and Joshua have been watching this race, and you've watched your husband and your father doing a sensational job. He may well kiss the trophy. He's earned it the hard way. And I hope I'm not going to hear anybody saying that Michael Schumacher was looking surly. He's obviously not as happy as he would have done if he'd won. But remember that all these drivers have been driving for some 2 hours, 1 hour, 57 minutes, 8 seconds as far as Damon Hill is concerned, under the most demanding conditions, physically and even more so mentally, with the race being stopped as driver after driver spun out of contention, fortunately without any injuries that I am aware of, and the stress was absolutely enormous. They come through it magnificently, and the World Championship goes down to the wire with Michael Schumacher leading Damon Hill now by just 1 World Championship point. Michael Schumacher has actually created a record here at Suzuka as far as he's concerned, because in his 3 previous drives here he failed to finish. And the same thing applies to Nigel Mansell. He's driven many times in Japan, but failed to finish ever. This is his first finish at Suzuka. And you may remember, those of you who've got the history of Formula One in your minds, that it was here at Suzuka that Nigel Mansell potentially lost the World Championship years ago, when he spun backwards into a wall in practice, hurt his back, and had to return home. Well, he's not returning home after this race. He's going to Australia. He's going to Australia with Damon Hill, with Michael Schumacher, with Jean Alesi, with Eddie Irvine and Heinz-Harald Frentzen, who finished first, second, third, fifth and sixth, sandwiching Alesi and Irvine. Nigel Mansell has finished in 4th position. And the complete list of finishers, 13 out of the 26 who started, were Damon Hill the winner, Schumacher second, Alesi third, Mansell fourth, Irvine fifth, Heinz-Harald Frentzen sixth, Häkkinen seventh, Fittipaldi eighth, Comas ninth, Salo in 10th position, Olivier Panis 11th, David Brabham 12th, 2 laps down at the end of the race. And I think that is one of the highest, yes, it's one of the highest positions that the Simtex team have had. And Sandro Zanardi 13th for Lotus, 2 laps down. 13 retirements in order of retirement. JJ Leto went out very early in the race, his first drive again for the Sauber team. Hideki Noda retired his Larousse. Taki Inui crashed in his Simtek. Katayama did the same thing in his Tyrrell. Johnny Herbert spun off. Michele Alboreto went out in his Minardi at the same time as Pierluigi Martini in his Minardi.
Well, congratulations, Damon. A sensational victory in a Japanese Grand Prix which had everybody on the edge of their seats. But certainly from where we were watching, it was exciting. What was it like for you?
Well, it was absolutely thrilling. I mean, I knew when Michael came in that obviously things were looking good, but he made such a storming drive to close the gap after the pit stop, and I had no moment to rest. It was flat out all the way. It was. I knew that I couldn't take any. I couldn't be cautious. I knew that I really just could not drive with any amount of conservatism. So I was really sort of throwing caution to the wind and in an effort to stay ahead of Michael. And that's so satisfying to race like that. That it really does mean a lot to end up in first position at the end of the race.
You made one stop in the race. Was this something you decided at the restart, or did you do it over the radio? Because I mean, the car looked pretty exhausted by the end of it.
Well, I mean, we